Chapter 541. Belated Trouble. I won't be starting immediately, as I have other important matters to take care of, but I'm saying it now so that you can prepare. I may come any time to announce the start of the duel. He looked at them with a stern gaze and added, "So, all 7 of you will be my 7 shadows. I plan to have 7 more lower shadows later, but right now your ranking will be determined by the duel. And when the other 7 come, if they're strong enough, they can displace any of you from your position." Northern spoke with a cold tone. "So, you must not get lazy after securing a position." He glanced at Jesai and Linus. Then he leaned back and exhaled helplessly. "I hope they all take this seriously. Even I am finding it hard to believe that I'm doing something like this." But he needed to. Something was coming, and Northern knew it more than ever before. Hence, he was preparing strongly for it. It might not be now, but he was sure it would be soon. It was only sensible that he began to prepare for that time now. A time when a paragon would be the least of his worries. Northern looked at them again, lingering for a moment before he asked, "Does anyone have a question?" Linus raised his hand. "Of course," Northern muttered before saying out loud, "Ask. You promised a certain pay for me. Is the pay before the duel or after?" Northern sighed and answered, "Use your own strength and let's see how far you can get. Only then would the pay be valuable to you." He looked around. "Does anyone else have a question?" Linus raised his hand again, causing Northern to roll his eyes. "Ask. Will you be a part of the hierarchical duel?" Revant from the side turned his head like an old creaking wooden door. "What insolent being! Shall I cause him to despair? Void Lord." His face was blank and void of emotion. Northern found it hard to discern if there was any hidden sarcasm in what Revant was saying or if he sincerely meant it. "You're more of a headache here. It's kind of decided who will be number 1 anyway." He scratched his forehead for a moment. "Let him be." Revant frowned slightly. "That's—" His words froze in his throat as his eyes turned to meet Northern's dark gaze, azure light burning from the darkness beyond them. He fell to his knee at once. "I apologize for my brash audacity, Void Lord." "Whatever." Northern waved him away and turned his gaze to Linus. "I am not a part of the hierarchical duel. I exist in the heavens and you here, below the heavens, Earth." He demonstrated by placing one hand high in the air and another very far below it, grinning enjoyably. Linus furrowed his brow, a vicious darkness burning in his eyes. "That's right, baby boy. Get fired up and aim to surpass the heavens. That way, I can use your strength very well before sending you back home." Northern suddenly remembered something. "Oh, and the 7 shadows will be receiving special weapons created by me. They will be exceptional. Once you lose your place as one of the 7 shadows, you also lose the right to wield those weapons. And I will also be giving a special present to the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd shadows to make them exceptionally strong." Immediately, Black Mamba, Night Terror, and Mr. Fluffy's eyes gleamed with rainbow lights. That should be enough to get all of them fired up. Now all is set. He smiled peacefully and said his final words. "That will be all. I have a lot to take care of, so I will be leaving now. Train hard and improve yourselves. When I'm done with what I'm doing in the surface world, I will be back for the duel." Then he vanished from the Void Palace in a fragment of a moment. Northern opened his eyes on the large comfortable bed and rolled around, sinking his face into its sweet-smelling sheet and staying in that position for a moment. Then a knock resounded on his door. Simultaneously, he raised his head and stood up, sitting on his bed with his legs crossed as he answered, "Come in." Shin gently pushed the door and entered, grabbing a Baroque-style chair with red foam as he got closer to Northern. He sturdily sat the chair directly in front of Northern and fell his butt on it. Northern silently watched. Shin had a stern and serious demeanor right from when he entered till he sat in front of Northern, even now as he spoke. "Alistran said some things to me. I have spoken to Ryan, and I think I should speak to you." Northern examined his father with cold, gauging eyes. "Okay. Father, what is this thing you want to say?" For the duration that we will be staying here and doing what we came for, it will be advisable to stay away from that boy, Darioil. He is truly a loyal dog to the governor, but he is unrestrained and could kill me? Northern cut through. Shin let out a pale smile and looked down. To be honest, I am more worried for the boy than I am for any of them. He paused and swallowed a breath before continuing. However, there is one thing that you really have to be careful of. The stern look on Shin's face returned, demanding even more attention from Northern. There is a lady in this mansion. She's the governor's granddaughter, and she's a part of the military. It'd be best not to have any trouble with her, as it can get us kicked out in an instant. Northern's mouth fell. Ah! Shin's brows furrowed together. What? What did you do? I promise you, I did absolutely nothing. I did not have any trouble with her. Technically, but she had with me. Northern gulped as he hid the rest of the words from Shin. Shin gave him an intense scrutiny before speaking again. In the next hour, we will need to start moving and searching around. He stood up. No, there won't be any need for that. He was already about to lift the chair, but Northern's words made him stop. He turned back and stared at Northern with a small frown coming on his face. What do you mean? Northern, with a cold light gleaming in his eyes, met Shin's gaze and replied, I know where Mother is. I have been searching since we got to this city. Chapter 542. The Night of Invasion Part 1. Shin folded his arms, raising an eyebrow as he asked again to be sure. What do you mean you've been searching since you got here? Northern stood up and walked towards the window. He stayed there for a beat, silent and motionless, then narrowed his gaze and pointed to the cathedral building that plunged its spires into the sky, high above every other edifice and visible from every corner of the city. She's there. Shin took a step closer, staring at the point Northern was indicating. Then he frowned and looked at his son. No, Northern, that can't be. You don't know what you're talking about. That place is a religious body dedicated to the constellation of Devon. You might not know this, but the constellation churches are protected by the Violence Act of Law. Every citadel, government, and nation has an imposed responsibility to consider them a protection priority when violence is involved. Turn against them, and we're turning against the entire city. Northern's expression remained blank as Shin explained. Even after Shin had spoken, he was silent for a few seconds. He glanced at Shin and then looked at the cathedral again. That's quite troublesome, isn't it? Shin had a stressed expression wearing thin on his face. He could feel his brow twitching. Yes, but what is that sinister smile for? Northern shrugged. I don't know. The thought of going against the entire city is just kind of exhilarating. Shin's face crumpled, lines forming all over as he frowned in despair, trying to comprehend what his son was saying. The most frustrating part was that he couldn't even tell the point Northern was trying to make. Northern lingered in silence for another moment and turned to Shin, sitting softly on the window frame. So, we give up and don't rescue Mother? Of course not, Shin retorted with a determined expression. But we cannot be rash. First of all, how are you so sure she's there? What informant told you this? And if this is the case, we should report it peacefully to them. Report it peacefully? Shin? Shin felt his heart drop as Northern coldly called his name. What is that look? Northern's face gave away no emotion, but there was a hint of disappointment in his eyes. It made Shin mixed up with different emotions, not even sure how to respond to the downgrading look his son was giving him. I'm telling you, messing with the churches of Constellation is a serious felony against unified law. This is not just... Northern tilted his head, his eyes seeming to freeze everything beyond them with the level of coldness they emitted. His gaze alone made Shin stop in the tracks of his world. It's your wife, and felony is what you're scared about? Shin shook his head for a beat. No, you don't understand. Don't make it sound like I don't care about Aisha. There is a way to do things and how to do things. If you say that the people who kidnapped Aisha are there, how are they there? What made you say so? We can't just barge into a body of devotion protected by the law because of your premonition, even if it's my wife. And I'm very sure you know Aisha would be finding the best way to do this without causing any noise. Northern grimaced. Fine. You want no noise. I'll show you no noise. Sit here. I'll bring mother to you. Northern turned and stepped on the window. North N. Immediately, Shin stretched his hand to stop him, but his son blurred and disappeared before he could complete his words. He frowned for a moment, then clenched his fist. Damn it! He stormed out of the room, running through the hallway. Alistran was waiting at the base of the stairs. Seeing the hurried look on Shin's face, he quickly asked, "What is wrong?" "Damn that boy. Please take me to the cathedral as fast as possible." Alistran paled as he heard Shin. Cathedral? Why the cathedral? The horror on his face intensified. Please don't tell me. We need to be fast. Alistran gulped and turned sharply, briskly walking out of the building with Shin. They were walking towards the Mount stable when Alistran suddenly stopped in his tracks and touched his cheek. What's wrong? Shin asked. He rubbed the stain on his cheek and looked at his hand. There was a black powdery stain on both his hand and cheek. Then he looked up. The sky had already transitioned to darkness, however in its early stages. The evening was just beginning to set deep, with night waiting to plunder in from the horizon. Both moons were like carved arcs backing each other to form a very curvy X. However, those were not what made Alistran's face contort with concerning horror. Shadowing upon them in the sky was an enormous vessel, right above the governor's mansion. It was as if this vessel had just instantaneously appeared above their heads. Alistran did not remember seeing something coming their way, even a few seconds ago. And there was no way such a colossal air vessel would come all the way to the governor's mansion and security wouldn't have been alerted. What was going on? Alistran's eyes shook in tense fear. Just as he was looking, Shin too was also looking, his face carrying a slight look of detest and displeasure. This cannot be good, he muttered. Ropes fell out of the vessel from each side, 3 on the left, 3 on the right, and figures began to descend from them. Alistran's eyes narrowed even more as he saw this. He covered his face in shame, giggling strangely as the intruders slid down their ropes. Damn you, the lawn. And here I was thinking I just might have a peaceful journey, even though he thought there were low chances of any drama happening in Arcadia. Arcadia was still Arcadia. It was a place of target for renowned thieves, criminals, heretical ideologists. Hence it was a city also known as the House of Commotion. But right now, what Alistran was seeing was nothing like those commotions he had witnessed in all his past travels here. This was a full-scale war. Arcadia was being invaded. Chapter 543. Divan of Freedom. The Churches of Constellation. They were a body of devotion that had its history deeply rooted in the beginning of time and had always managed to preserve their importance through generations. All constellations had a church designated to them, and although the influence of these churches on society in this age had drastically declined, they were still treated as important and revered. It was more like they were relics that could never be forgotten, and above all of them stood the Church of Ul. In fact, Ul was a concept of devotion that existed in every church. Right beside every symbol of every constellation was always a statue of Ul. Northern stood in front of the golden gate of the cathedral. No one was guarding it. There were a few ladies clothed in white apparel, flowing all around their bodies like garments, with golden ornaments holding it to their waists, walking around the compound. None of them paid attention to him. Northern stayed outside for a few more seconds, rubbing his chin with his eyes closed. I can't be mistaken. It was right below this place. Northern, since the moment he entered the city, had activated Chaos Eyes. Since becoming a master, he could now sense the essence of every living being, even down to their emotions. He could also sense hidden presences, but it was necessary for him to reveal his Chaos Eyes. His normal eyes perceived these things, of course, but when he opened his Chaos Eyes, it was on a different and much more magnanimous scale than what he saw and felt with his normal eyes. Could be said that when Northern opens his Chaos Eyes, it is when he truly begins to see. However, Keeping the Chaos Eyes open chomps down not on his void essence but his stamina. The more he saw with the eyes, the more he felt himself drained. And that had been the reason for the intense tiredness. However, in the few hours that he kept Chaos Eyes open, he had meticulously searched every nook and cranny of Arcadia for his mother's presence. As he stepped into the room and walked towards his window, he finally found it. There was something right beneath the cathedral. It made him so happy that they were alive. He could feel the familiar essence of his mother, the beauty of her soul. Then he could feel another one, a newborn of sorts, brimming with an otherworldly essence. Northern immediately understood whose presence that was, and nothing mattered anymore. He would rescue them and finally meet her, because he knew that there was no one, no power, no existence that could stop him from retrieving his mother and sister. He was very happy. Shin's reply, when he heard that it was the cathedral, was very annoying. However, Northern had done a great job reining in his anger. So what if it's the citadel? I can feel my mother right beneath their floor. Northern exhaled and slowly opened the gate. The gate was not closed, and that was how every citadel was. Their gates were always open in case anyone wanted to offer their prayers to Ul and the constellations. Northern walked towards the compound. In the center was a fountain, and in the middle of the fountain was the magnificent statue of a colossal horse. Devon, Northern muttered. Every constellation has an animal that depicts their nature. Northern, at a young age when he learned about them, had thought it to be weird that these animals had a striking resemblance to the animals on Earth. However, aside from them being used to depict the nature of constellations, they don't exist in the world of trial. Hence, it was important to note that these were not the constellations' physical forms. As a matter of fact, some intellectual debates had proposed that constellations do not have a physical form, nor do they have an active consciousness. However, they are a conduit of essence that functions alongside Ul in creating the balance of the world and maintaining it. Of course, this branches out to several areas when the topic of the shape of the soul is mentioned. But that was one thing Northern had not been opportune to learn yet. It was not for his level. When a person becomes a paragon, their soul gains a personality and form that can originate from any constellation. I thought it was nonsense, but now that I think about it, Northern looked up at the towering statue of the stallion raising its forelimb high up, its body coiling with stark muscles. His mind drifted back to the fight with the Emperor of Luengard, the speed on his legs, the way those flames wrapped his leg. It was something he instantly knew that he wouldn't be able to replicate despite having copied the Emperor's talent. Perhaps when he becomes a paragon. I wonder what the shape of my own soul will be like, he said to himself as he lowered his head to take a look at the base of the statue. Then he read something. Devon is found only by souls who know the value of freedom. Freedom, huh? He muttered again after reading and raised his head. Do you find yourself wondering what true freedom means? Northern was not surprised to hear the voice. He smiled and turned around to face the bald man with tightly shut eyes and a beaded rosary hanging down his neck. If you don't find a way to leave this cathedral right now, the meaning of true freedom will be the least you are worrying about. The man's eyes widened in terror, but before he could turn to his side, Northern had vanished. He shivered, feeling an intense cold seep into his blood. The night suddenly felt darker than it looked. He looked at the statue in front of him and closed his eyes, clasping his palms together and bowing his head slightly. Bless and protect us, Ul. Bless and protect us, Devon. Following his words, the entire cathedral shook. Ripples of earthquake ran across every part of the ground. The man's eyes widened terribly as he saw the cracks run towards the horse statue and destroy its base. Slowly but surely, the colossal statue was crumbling towards him, and all he could do was stare in paralyzing fear, beads of sweat stagnant over his face. Chapter 544. The Night of Invasion Part 2. Shin stared up, paralyzed as the people from the airship slid down the ropes like agile snakes. The moment their feet touched the ground, they did not attack. Instead, they fell into rehearsed lines. Their movements were sharp and unwasteful in any manner. Both to the right and to the left, they all began to shoot in directions and stand erect like poles. In an instant, the compound of the governor's mansion was filled with people in black uniforms. Alistran looked at all of them, his face etched with contemplative confusion. Several beads of sweat had formed and were rolling down his cheeks. Some were too paralyzed to even move. Then something fell off the airship, causing a tremendous reaction. The entire earth shook as if a boulder the size of the airship had just been thrust into the ground with the force of a colossal titan. He stood frozen, feeling his body vibrate vividly the moment the earthquake happened. Shin instinctively took several steps. It was a single leap. He was far away from where he and Alistran were standing. The old Joker was too gripped by fear to move. His mind shattered, each piece racing in 1,000 thought patterns. And he could only arrive at a single conclusion of the presence that he was feeling. It can't be, it can't be, it can't be, it can't be. Alistran muttered like a man whose screws had been loosened barely by the cold hands of fear. Shin's hand was on the hilt of his sword, but he couldn't dare to draw. All his experience and instincts allied to make him understand that in a moment like this, he could die with a single misstep. First of all, I don't even know what the person wants. It will be best to just stay still for now, because this presence, I am sure about it. He's a paragon. In the sinking silence of the evening, the steps resounded out of the cloud of dust that the tumultuous landing had caused. The man walking out of the cloud had a scar on one of his eyes. A black military coat fluttered on his shoulder, and one of his hands rested on his sword while the other held a large blunt. He stopped in his tracks and put the blunt in his mouth for a moment, exuding a thick and oppressing cloud of smoke from his mouth as he took it out. Then he examined the person standing in front of him with a small interest in his eyes. "Oh, you dog. What are you doing here?" Despite being insulted nakedly, Alistran did not seem to want to retaliate. Instead, he forced out a smile. "Lieutenant, you've changed since the last time I saw you. What are you doing in the governor's house with so many forces?" The lieutenant took another satisfying smoke of his blunt and looked at Alistran for a moment. Then his eyes drifted off Alistran to Shin, who was still in stance, ready to pull his sword at any moment. The lieutenant raised a brow. Fascinating. That black hair and red eyes. Undoubtedly Kageyama clan. Since they are an introverted lot, I presume it's the infamous rogue child. Younger brother of the patriarch, Shin Kageyama. Whoosh. Pleased to make your acquaintance. Shin's eyes widened. What? His eyes had been on the lieutenant the whole time. Not even a blink did he blink. Even the hair on his skin had all stood erect, ready to unleash his sword art at the slightest threatening moment. And yet, he didn't see the lieutenant move. Just as the lieutenant was standing in front of Shin, a long tunnel of wind separated, vanishing slowly while the man stretched out his hand in front of him. Shin had not even seen the moment the lieutenant extended his hand. Paragons are truly a different existence. And Northern fought one? Strangely, what Ryan had said seemed to disturb him at a moment like this. The lieutenant leaned his hand back on his sword and looked up at the building, frowning slightly before looking at Shin. Then his voice, authoritative, clear, and sharp like a butcher's knife cutting tofu, resounded. "Infamous rogue of the Kageyama clan, I have no business with you, neither you, useless dog, nor the boy up there. My only business is with the governor. I presume you lot won't be senseless today, yes?" "Yes, Lieutenant. We will be taking our leave right now." Alistran's voice rolled out from behind. He looked at Shin, who was still frozen in that ready position, and shook his head. Shin, breaking a sweat, disengaged. Both of them vanished from the lieutenant's front. A moment later, all three of them vanished completely from the mansion. The captain took another round of his blunt before swinging his hand forward. As his hand rose, every force of the military that had just landed stomped their legs on the ground, creating a resounding earthquake, and rushed forward in lines, permeating every corner of the mansion. Suddenly someone flashed into the sky, falling down on the lieutenant with a guttural yell. You traitor! How dare you come against the governor? The lieutenant lazily looked up and then looked away. Another presence suddenly flashed just above the captain, colliding with Darioil and crashing into the wall of the mansion. Another flashed and landed on their knee, crimson hair flowing smoothly beneath the moon's light. Lieutenant, please let us deal with menial missions like this. The lieutenant's eyes were unchanged by his subordinate's plea. Instead, they looked bored and displeased, their depths filled with hubris. His eyes gained a little light as a powerful step began to resound and caused the whole place to quake gently. The gigantic master of the mansion finally revealed himself, his daughter standing right beside him. Every corner of his body brimmed with so much pronounced power that the mobs dared not approach even the lady walking next to him. He finally stopped a few tens of steps away from the lieutenant, was silent for a moment before his resonating voice could be heard. Dante, you have always been too bright a kid. I am not surprised that you are the one staging this rebellion. Of course you are not, the lieutenant sounded with a little glee. After all, you were the one who inspired this idea in me. You are ignorant, and the only thing that bestows children that are ignorant is despair, failure, destruction. As expected of my mentor, still finding the moment to give me a lecture even at a time like this. He dropped the fat blunt in his hand, killing its smoke with a soft step. You know what I am here for. Your death will announce my intention loud and clear to the higher-ups. Fool! The governor's voice resounded with the weight of an immense boulder, but the lieutenant continued, his voice intrigued. If I get defeated here, I will have no complaints. It means this revolution, the new age of the continent that I have always envisioned, was never bound to happen. His voice lingered for a bit. Then a dangerous white light burned in his eyes as he continued. If I win, however, this is the beginning of my conquest. The entire continent will be crumbled and rebuilt by I, Dante Gaffer, the only descendant of the great revolutionary, Axentals Gaffer. Chapter 545. Brethren in Darkness. Northern appeared right where he had sensed the presence stronger. The ground he was standing on was directly above the point it was. However, now, seriously, there was no presence anymore. Or rather, he couldn't feel it like he would have with Chaos Eyes. I wish my stamina would gain a tremendous boost, so I can use Chaos Eyes anytime I want. It could be easily solved by severe physical training, but Northern had a nudging feeling this wouldn't be the case for him. Still, he considered dedicating himself to intense training and sharpening the blunt edges of his skills that had the tendency to become weaknesses. He was strong, but he wasn't strong enough. Not yet. I can't get complacent. I have to resume training after all of this is over, Northern muttered inaudibly. He raised one leg and was about to stomp the ground when a chaos vision flashed before his eyes. His face became cold and he dropped his leg. Then, the next moment, a tremendous vibration resounded through the earth. Taking advantage of the vibration that streaked through the earth, Northern plunged his feet into the ground, easily breaking into the stratum below. The problem was, the vibration had such a strong intensity that the floor Northern broke weakened all other parts and began to cause an earthquake Northern really didn't plan for. He looked up and saw the grounds above begin to crumble, the cracks running even further forward like rabid dogs. Oh damn, that's sad. A moment later, however, he shrugged and looked around him. He was surrounded by thick darkness. Even the brightest of flames would barely illuminate a dot in this darkness. It was like a cloth, forcibly leaching onto every part of the air. The darkness was oppressive and almost sentient. Luckily, Northern was not a stranger to darkness. In fact, darkness was his ally. He smiled crookedly and extended one hand. You guys would have to do better than this if you think you want to hide from me. The figures in the darkness suddenly began to falter, all of them looking at each other. Their reaction is amazing. Were they expecting me? Despite the fact that the debris from the ground above had suddenly disrupted them, they had managed to react quickly and hide themselves perfectly in the darkness. All of them were scattered around, skillfully surrounding the intruder like a pack of predators ganging up on a single but powerful prey. They had a careful demeanor added to every inch of their disposition. Northern could tell that none of them were underestimating him in the slightest, which is why even after speaking, none were coming out. They are supposed to be elves, after all. It'd have been disappointing if they didn't have this level of coordination. He extended both hands up, locking his fingers together as he stretched his body up, then sideways, announcing, "All right then, since you don't want to reveal yourselves, thinking there's no way I'd probably be able to see in such unnatural darkness, I will just come after every one of you and save the strongest for last." He finally finished stretching. A twisted glee danced evilly on his face for a moment. Then none of them saw him. Swoosh. Yelp. Arg. Gah.
Heal.
Northern's hand plunged out of the darkness to suddenly grab another's face. Chaos flames igniting on the face and causing him to dance around in darkness, screaming, "Aw!" Before that, all others had lost consciousness before they saw the attack coming at them. Northern accurately hit them with the blunt side of stainless. His eyes sparkled with a malicious blue light as he watched the dark-robed man dance around in agony, sinister yet astonishing bluish-black flames burning his head. The hues of his flames reflected on his face for a moment, displaying the visage of a vicious arsonist adoring the crude art he had created. Northern's eyes turned cold and blank the next moment as he locked eyes with the next target, the man suddenly staggering back as his eyes met Northern's. "You still won't believe me? Until I kill all of you." Suddenly, the veil of darkness began to soften and slowly dissipate. In a few moments, the underground cleared. Several men in dark robes stood scattered around, their faces covered by the hoods of their sinister clothing. However, green glows like orbs shot out of the darkness beneath their hoods with sharp bloodlusts. Not sharp enough to cut, however. Northern leaned the dark mortal over his shoulder as his eyes pivoted to a single man standing amongst all of them. It was the strongest essence he had felt amongst them when he used Chaos Eyes. The man spoke. "Young human, who are you, and what do you want?" Northern pointed the sword at the man. "You have my mother with you. Give her to me, and I can freely walk out of this place with no problems." The man lingered. He turned his head to his comrades, seeming puzzled. Then he turned his head to Northern. "Human, you are very mistaken. I am sure we do not have your mother." The man responded with a kind tone. Every other one of them was silent, but their gazes were burning viciously. Northern could almost feel their anger pelting his skin like cold stones, causing him slight discomfort. Damn, they are no joke. He carefully sized all of them up based on the quantity of their essence. Then he trailed his eyes back to the man. "An elf with a newborn. Or maybe she gave birth while you guys kidnapped her. This is how much I am going to say. Bring her out, and I will leave peacefully with her." The man Northern was pointing his sword to was grimly silent this time. "Young human, who sent you? Do not be a schlemiel. You cannot." The man stopped abruptly as Northern's sword was suddenly arching towards him from below. He vanished just in time, the black blade cutting through his afterimage. Northern clicked his tongue in irritation. He's fast. Missing the attack left a really bad taste in his mouth. All the robed individuals suddenly flung away their robes, revealing sheen and sparkling sleek silver armor. They manifested different weapons. Some great swords, others bows and arrows, and all aimed at Northern. The man himself slowly walked forward, his golden blonde hair brilliantly falling down his shoulders, to his back and front. A small crown-like large ring adorned his forehead, and his narrow, monolid eyes glowed with a cold and experienced fury. "Young human, your foolishness shall now be rewarded with a grave and gruesome death. For our brethren that you have fallen, you shall suffer greatly." Tisk! Northern glanced around them with a tired and stressed expression. He was motionless and blank for a moment. Then he glanced at all of them, his eyes glowing softly. They suddenly widened, a sinister grin spreading on his face. What the hell? These are really useful talents. Chapter 546. Talent Harvest, Part 1. Northern grinned at the multiple panels that appeared before his eyes as the elves prepared to attack him. All of them, at once, remarkably using their talent abilities with the weapons they wielded. Do you want to copy talent? A,000 Wind Blade, A. For 300 talent fragments. Do you want to copy talent? Air Barrier, C. For 100 talent fragments. Do you want to copy talent? Tidal Wave, B. For 200 talent fragments. Do you want to copy talent? Windless Star, A. For 300 talent fragments. And many more Northern saw, all appearing before his eyes simultaneously, thanks to the crew of elves ready to attack. Each of them was coated in the aura of their essence, exuding a threatening intent with their form of attack. Northern twirled Stainless in one hand, skillfully handling the lightning Odachi despite its difference in feel. He thought for a moment whether to use Granger and subtly shook his head. That'd be a cheat right now. What are you muttering to yourself about? It's too late to regret it now, the leader of the cult yelled. He extended his hand forward, grimly commanding, "Everyone, eradicate this cretin." Instantly, the entire atmosphere was drowned in tension. Every elf moved. However, Northern was no longer there. The leader's eyes widened belatedly as he flung his hand to parry Northern's sword. He staggered back, unable to contain the force that vibrated in his hands. His palms hurt as if he had struck a colossal bell with heavy steel. His muscles almost instinctively dropped the sword, but he clenched tighter as he stabilized his footing. The elves, their eyes burning with madness, wasted no movement as they saw where Northern had turned out to be. They all pivoted and shot towards him. Northern grinned for a moment as they dove at him. The closest one finally lunged his spear at Northern's back, thinking he surely had a clean hit. But Stainless had blocked it. Northern's hand was unnaturally bent back to deflect the attack. He deflected it with a swift twist of his body, causing the elf to fly away, crashing into the roof of the underground and destroying the already weakened ground of that area. Another two were already upon him, or so they thought. Northern, with his pronounced speed, easily plunged Stainless into the eyes of one as he sidestepped the long sword that cleaved downwards at him. Then he grabbed the other by the collar of his armor and threw him away with ease. The elf crashed into the pile of crumbled huge stones. The others hesitated for a moment, gulping, but they quickly resolved themselves again and darted towards him. Before one got to him, Northern suddenly narrowed his eyes and smiled. Pow, pow, pow. Now that's an interesting ability. All three invisible airstrikes were deflected by the air, leaving the elf behind the darting one with a pale face. Northern, his attention locked on the guy that had struck from a distance, still deflected the hammer of the one close without looking at it. He reversed his grip on Stainless and plunged it into the side flank of the elf as he raised his hammer for another attack. A thread of lightning danced out of the sword, consuming the elf and burning him to a crisp. "You are interesting," Northern said as he, in a flash, appeared in front of the elf, rubbing his chin. "How?" The elf's voice trembled. Northern's speed was just too incomprehensible for them. Another finally managed to successfully get close enough for a sneak attack. His form slowly revealed, as if breaking out of space, as his dagger arched towards Northern only to be hung in the air. He felt like he was still swinging in for the stab, but his hand was not touching Northern. "You think I didn't see you all the way from that side till you got close enough to land a hit? TSK. You were not a threat, so why should I care?" He rolled his eyes over to the stealth attacker for a brief second and focused back on the ranged attacker from earlier. "You, on the other hand," he rubbed his brows. "Since I don't have a lot of talent fragments, I can't be greedy. I'll just save the prospects, kill off the rest, and decide which talent I will take after that. Then I will kill off the remaining." Northern deliberated amidst the commotion. He finally turned his attention to the stealth elf who kept striking but to no avail. Black Lance. The Black Lance didn't just cleave the elf's body into 3 parts horizontally. The cleave went all the way to the wall behind, cleanly cutting through the underground all the way to the ocean that surrounded Arcadia. It meant that beneath Arcadia was 3 smooth cleave of the ground that could affect the entire foundation of the city anytime, any day. The leader of the elves saw this and felt cold sweat on his body. There was nothing human about the way Northern was dealing with the elves. How is this possible? We are the mighty elves of Stuart. We are not like these cretins. We are superior in soul essence and have a stronger connection to the shape and trueness of our soul. We have mastered the art of talent utilization. And still, this human, how is he dealing with us like we are cockroaches? Northern wasn't even giving them time to act. Every attack either stopped in the air, was easily deflected, or the attacker's hands were already flying into the air before the attacks themselves were completed. Gore splattered and sprayed with every movement and flash of his figure. And yet there were few that he would intentionally leave. All the leader of the cult could see at some point were flashes and afterimages of the white-haired young human. The agonizing cries of his comrades paralyzed him. He froze there, his eyes trembling as Northern crudely dealt with every single one of them. Northern wrenched his blade free from the last elf, splashing crimson gore across the ground with the swing of his sword. He then met the gaze of the leader, who was the only one he had not touched. Black flames ignited on the shiny odachi, dulling the sheen of its blade. Simultaneously, yellow sparks danced around the length of the blade. Northern took gentle steps towards the man. "So, are you ready to start talking? Where is my mother?" He stopped and extended the sword directly to the man's face. Chapter 547. Talent Harvest, Part 2. It happened so fast. All he could hear were the screams of his comrades. They had put so much at stake to come all the way to this place because the princess was that important. After so much searching, they had finally found her. They'd be able to make her happy, to let her rest. That was the least consolation. There was royal blood. Finally, the ritual was going to be complete. The second coming was very nigh. All they needed to do was propagate the gateway for their return. It was just that alone. And someone, a completely unknown and unexpected variable, had appeared and messed up their plans. The cult leader's mind ran helter-skelter, discombobulated by the reality before him. A blade burning with black flames and yellow sparks pointed directly at his eyes. But he didn't seem to care at the moment. All that was in his mind was his aggravating failure. Why have I failed her? His mind cried. Should I just go ahead and use Chaos Eyes? Northern thought. If he used Chaos Eyes, he'd be able to tell where they were again. No, that would be unwise. I am detecting a level of essence equal to that of Thalen, so he is undoubtedly strong. If he were to use the Chaos Eyes and cut his stamina in half, he wouldn't lose, but it would still be unpleasant to receive an attack or two. While Northern was in contemplation, the elf's mind was going crazy. He is supposed to come soon. No, I can't sabotage this too. I have to open the gateway, I have to do this. He is dangerous. This human can foil my entire plan worth decades of meticulous preparation. I have to deal with him. Hey, I don't even need to know how to read your mind to know what you're thinking right now. Want to kill me that bad? Northern commented with a delighted look on his face. The dark thoughts racing through the cult leader's mind were leaking everywhere on his bright and beautiful face. His eyes had reddened, a dark and grim frown crudely contorting his facial features. He looked somewhat twisted, a hint of his handsome face still managing to reflect even in such a crazed state. Wham! The atmosphere was suddenly released by a tremendous burst of essence. This was not an unrefined, raw release. One moment under the pressure of the soul essence, and Northern didn't even need to use his eyes to know that this was the power of a true savant. It was insane how an elf could be a savant and be 100 levels different in strength from a human of the same rank. Not me, though. Of course, Northern himself was an existence that put to shame every level difference, be it 100 or 1,000. He gripped Stainless more tightly, swinging it backward and lowering his stance to get ready. His eyes locked and calculating, waiting. Then he glanced down at the panel. Do you want to copy talent? Whispering Gale? A? For 600 talent fragments. Oh, wow. In the next beat, however, Northern suddenly froze in place, wearing a dark frown on his face. I can't move. And the cult leader was gone. Much worse was, I can't sense him at all. He had totally erased all traces of himself. It was as if no one was there. Not even Northern could sense anything, which should have been impossible. Northern's face was grim. He hadn't thought that there'd be something he wouldn't be able to sense with his increased abilities. At least not so soon. His eyes suddenly widened as a magnanimous pressure fell on the atmosphere. He twisted his body, wrenching himself free from the position with blood splashing out of his body as he twisted his own bone, muscle, and flesh to leave the position as fast as he could. By the skin of his teeth, he managed to spiral away from the attack that bit into the ground, shattering the surface of the floor with a loud crack. What the hell was that? Why couldn't I sense the danger in that attack? Northern's instincts had reacted in circumspect to the level of danger of the attack. He could feel something gnawing at his throat, yet at the same time he could feel nothing. It was so deceptive. The entirety of the attack, its presence, and intent were perfectly hidden, created to throw their enemy off. Northern took a glance around the areas of his body where blood was leaking. Majorly his joints. His shoulder was dislocated. His legs were also bent outwardly. The cult leader slowly rose from the unsuccessful attack, clouds of dust clearing to reveal his intense fiery expression. He watched as Northern's body crudely snapped back into shape. The white-haired boy straightened himself up and cracked his neck to the left and right. I was mistaken to have underestimated you. Looks like you have a very tricky talent. Of course, he did. He was an elf, after all. They and everyone in the underworld had a better understanding of talent and talent abilities, soul essence, and its application. Even the weakest of them would be an opponent he needed to be careful against. Caladhel and Sura had proved that to him. No doubt about it. He is stronger than Cal. But of course not Sura. Northern observed the man for a while. He slowly stepped back, entering into the bosom of the depths of the underground, unilluminated by the rays of the dual moonlights from above. He breathed in sharply, his hands tightening around Stainless. The pain in his joints throbbed, enhanced by the pain of chaos thread fixing him. Blood dripped slowly from his wounds, but he ignored it. The ground shifted slightly under his feet, an almost imperceptible tremor. Northern's eyes darted to the left, sensing something, but again, nothing registered. His mind was running through every possibility, trying to figure out and understand what trick the elf was using to evade his senses. And then there it was. Chapter 548. Talent Harvest, Part 3. A sudden gust of wind swept through the underground, subtle but chilling. Northern's instincts flared as something belatedly registered. The elf was manipulating the air itself, using invisible currents to obscure his movements. Without hesitation, Northern flung himself to the right, his body reacting instinctively before his mind even caught up. Stainless slashed outward in a wide arc, black flames erupting from the blade, trailing yellow sparks. Clang! His blade met resistance, a force pushing against him that hadn't been there a second ago. Sparks flew as the cult leader's figure materialized from the swirling wind, wielding a curved blade that shimmered with compressed air. Northern gritted his teeth, pushing back against the weight, but the elf's strength, enhanced by the wind, was immense. The elf's lips curled into a twisted smile, eyes gleaming with malice. Cretan, you won't survive this. Whispering Gale is the wind itself. I am everywhere and nowhere. Northern felt the pressure mounting, but he smirked back, his eyes gleaming dangerously. You talk too much. With a sudden burst of strength, Northern shoved Stainless forward, forcing the elf to jump back. As he did, the winds around them shifted, carrying faint echoes, whispers of movement that Northern couldn't fully track. It was as if the elf was everywhere at once, his movements leaving behind afterimages in the wind. The air grew still for a moment and then, FWIP. Something sliced through the air behind him, silent but deadly. Northern twisted, but too late. Sharp pain ripped through his side as an invisible blade made of pure wind essence grazed his ribs, the impact knocking him off balance. Blood sprayed into the air as he stumbled, gasping from the force of the blow. The cult leader appeared once more, a few feet away, his blade of swirling wind still held in a tight grip. His eyes glowed with satisfaction. The twisted grin etched even deeper on his face. "You can't stop it, boy. You'll never know where the next strike will come from. Whispering Gale keeps me hidden. You can't escape what you can't sense." "What? How?" Void Force was not activated. Northern's eyes widened. He still couldn't make perfect sense of what was happening. Even though he knew the elf was using wind to play some tricks, there was still nothing he could do about it. Of course, he had a handful of talents that would instantly neutralize the situation or turn the tables with a single move, but where was the fun in that? Northern subtly grinned. "All right, I'm enjoying this." Pain radiated through his body like fire, but still he stood tall, meeting the elf's gaze. His mind worked quickly, processing every attack, every movement. There had to be a way to counter it. He began to observe every disposition of the elf and replay all his past actions with his eyes. Then it clicked. It's not just wind. He's creating pockets of air pressure, displacing the flow so I can't sense him until it's too late. Northern wiped the blood from his grinning mouth, straightening as much as his battered body would allow. "Clever," he muttered under his breath. He winced as he tightened his grip on Stainless. "But I've dealt with worse." Without warning, he slammed Stainless into the ground, sending a shockwave of black fire across the floor. The flames surged in every direction, consuming the air and leaving no room for the elf to hide. The cult leader's eyes flickered with uncertainty for a split second as the flames roared toward him. But he didn't falter. The winds howled around him, carrying his form up and away, vanishing into the air like a breeze. Northern's eyes narrowed. So he's using the wind not just to hide, but to phase out of reach. The elf's voice echoed through the underground, carried on the wind. "Do you understand now? The wind obeys me, and you'll never be able to catch me." Suddenly, Northern felt it, a shift in the air pressure directly behind him. His eyes widened as a gust of wind materialized into the elf's blade, inches from his neck. But this time, Northern was ready. At the last second, he twisted, wrenching his body with all his might. Blood sprayed from his shoulder as he dislocated his arm in the process, but it was enough. He narrowly dodged the lethal strike. The elf's blade missed by mere inches, biting into the ground with a thunderous crack. Too close, Northern thought, gritting his teeth against the pain. His body screamed in protest, but he forced himself to keep moving, to stay one step ahead. The elf rose slowly, his expression twisted with frustration. His wind blade shimmered with barely contained power, but his eyes were fixed on Northern's injured form. "You should have died by now," the elf hissed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "But it doesn't matter. I'll finish this." Northern took a deep breath, forcing his body to straighten despite the agony. His mind was racing. It was racing with adrenaline. It was racing with excitement. This was it. This was what he had been looking for, a fight that was technical, a fight that humans should be able to give, something he had to think and be creative about. The elf paused mid-movement. "Why are you smiling? What is so funny, you cretin?" His face was starkly dark with malice. Northern understood perfectly well the kind of viciousness that had grown in the heart of the cult leader elf. In fact, seeing his reaction intrigued him. Despite the elf's anger, his movements and actions were still pretty decent and calculated, unlike the guy on the airship. "That one has a nasty personality. I'm sure about that. You still have time to think." The elf sneered, his voice dripping with contempt as he saw Northern's smirk. "You'll have plenty of time to regret it once I'm done with you." The wind surged violently, swirling around the elf's form like a living entity, sharpening into invisible blades, ready to tear Northern apart. He was preparing for another lethal strike. This time, Northern knew the elf wouldn't hold back. Northern's grin widened, his mind fully focused, calculating every possible outcome. He still couldn't sense the elf's movements perfectly, but that didn't matter anymore. Something was happening to his body with each successful attack of the wind. His body was understanding the rhythm of the wind, the pressure changes, and the flow of the elf's attacks. Chapter 549, The Fallen Estate. The sprawling expanse of the governor's mansion was completely unrecognizable. The magnificent building and its nicely kept garden now shattered into a canvas of destruction. The ground, once smooth and polished, was marred by deep craters, as if the earth itself had become fragile beneath the weight of the battle. Cracks spiderwebbed across the estate, turning it into a maze of ruptured stone and dirt. Some fissures stretched for dozens of feet, their jagged edges glowing faintly from the lingering heat of their creation. Amidst the palette of craters stood a man, the long military coat on his shoulders flapping continuously in the wind, its bottom damaged, burnt and blackened. His eyes carried a detached intensity, reflecting the chaos around him. He stood still, as if the devastation was beneath his concern, merely a trivial consequence of his power. His boots scraped against the uneven ground as he shifted his stance, surveying the wreckage with an air of grim satisfaction. Before him, a large figure struggled to rise from one of the deeper craters, a man barely holding on to consciousness, his body battered and bruised. His shirt was ruggedly torn, blood seeping through the lacerated gaps on his skin, and his face was twisted in pain. "Is this all your strength amounts to?" the man in the military coat asked, his voice cold, devoid of emotion. "I expected more from a governor." The fallen man coughed, blood splattering onto the cracked ground as he tried to speak, but the effort was futile. His voice was lost in the wind, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the battlefield that had once been his home. Lieutenant Dante sighed boringly. He stabbed his sword impossibly into the ground and brought out another fat blunt from his pocket, complaining in a low tone. "Damn, I wasted a whole snuff for nothing. If I had known you'd be so easy to deal with, I'd have just fought you with my snuff." He lit the fat blunt and put it in his mouth. Then he raised his head to look at the governor. He exhaled smoke and sighed. "What a pathetic state you are in, Mentor." The governor's closing eyes flickered open, and the man began to regain his previous determination. Oh, that's more like it." The governor growled painfully, and suddenly, despite his immense weight and size, disappeared into a blur. Lieutenant Dante's eyes narrowed slightly as the governor vanished from sight. He took another long drag from his blunt, the tip glowing faintly in the dim light of the ruined battlefield. His demeanor remained calm, unbothered by the sudden change in the governor's behavior. "Finally," Dante muttered, exhaling a cloud of smoke. "I was starting to think you'd just lie there and die quietly." The air around him shifted as the governor reappeared with a thunderous crash, his fist aimed directly at Dante's head. The ground beneath them trembled with the force of his reappearance, sending cracks spiraling outward from where he landed. Dante puffed out smoke and raised his head slowly to meet the governor's enormous fist, a crazed grin on his face. He tilted his head lazily to the side, avoiding the strike by mere inches. The governor's fist smashed into the ground, creating yet another deep crater. Dust and debris exploded into the air, momentarily clouding their surroundings. "That's more like it, Mentor," Dante said mockingly, tapping the ash off his blunt. "But you're still too slow." The governor, his face twisted in a mixture of rage and agony, roared as he swung again. This time, his speed was even greater, each strike coming at Dante with the force of a raging storm. The air whistled as his fists cut through it, but no matter how fast he moved, Dante evaded every blow with effortless grace, his body swaying just enough to dodge. "You taught me well," Dante continued, his tone almost playful. "But you forgot one thing. I don't play fair." Before the governor could react, Dante's form blurred, vanishing from his sight. For a moment, the governor was left standing in confusion, his heavy breaths echoing in the stillness of the ruined mansion. Then, Dante reappeared in front of him. What the governor saw Dante holding made him tremble heavily. His entire form seemed to cave in as he saw the only apple of his eyes, dangling in Dante's hand with a large hole within her belly, blood trickling down her mouth and belly, running her white shirt. Everything suddenly became senseless before the poor man. Dante! His scream, powerful, roared and reverberated across the whole of Arcadia, causing the very air to shudder with intense pressure. Oh! Dante's mouth opened slightly, surprised as to how the governor still managed to summon so much strength despite having expended himself far enough. The man grasped a pole of a lampstand that had managed to survive the darkest hours of their battle until this moment. He pulled it out effortlessly. However, in his hands, the lampstand gained fortification, glowing with a faint purple aura covering its frame as it increased in size. The governor's body trembled as he held the fortified lampstand, now transformed into a massive, glowing weapon infused with his remaining energy. His eyes, once filled with pain and despair, now burned with an intensity fueled by rage and loss. The purple aura around the lampstand crackled with violent energy, pulsating in rhythm with his labored breaths. Dante stood there, the grin never fading from his face, but a glint of curiosity flashed in his eyes. He lazily flicked the ashes of his blunt into the wind and examined the governor's newfound weapon with mild amusement. So, this is your last stand, eh? Dante mused, stepping forward nonchalantly. Amazing how the rage fueled by loss can ignite greater strength. Honestly, Mentor, it's almost touching. He lazily flung the girl away, the lifeless body thrashing into the nearby wall. The governor didn't respond. His entire focus was now honed in on Dante. His eyes devoid of any traces of humanity. Pure rage locked on the lieutenant that stood before him. He had taken Dante as a son during his earlier days in the military. The boy with immense talent, who was praised as a genius, whom every citadel would spend every ounce of resources to get but decided to be a soldier. A dog for the government. Back then, the governor, who was just a lieutenant then, had taken this boy as a son, nurtured his talent, and helped him to see the world in a different light. Who would have thought that Dante would bear the same fangs which the governor helped him grow at the same governor? With a roar that echoed his earlier cry, he charged, the massive lampstand raised high above his head, now a deadly weapon infused with all the power he had left. The earth trembled beneath his feet as he rushed forward. His speed, despite his heavy frame, defied logic as he swung the lampstand with the force of a hurricane. The glowing purple aura around it grew brighter, as if feeding off his fury, becoming a beacon of his final vengeance. Dante raised an eyebrow, impressed at the sheer speed and power the governor had mustered. But his body remained still, relaxed, as he waited for the inevitable clash. The lampstand descended with a thunderous crash, the air screaming as it tore through the space between them. But just as it was about to connect, Dante moved, his form blurring once again. With impossible grace, he sidestepped the governor's attack, the ground beneath them exploding as the lampstand impacted the earth, sending chunks of stone and debris flying into the air. Too slow, Dante whispered, appearing behind the governor. The governor roared in frustration, spinning around with another wild swing, but Dante dodged it effortlessly, his movements fluid and calm. Each attack was met with the same frustrating evasion, as if Dante was merely toying with him. "You're wasting your time, old man," Dante said, his tone almost bored now. "This won't change anything. The space between a sage and a paragon is enormous, more enormous than you can ever imagine." The governor's breathing grew more labored with each swing, his once unstoppable force beginning to wane. But he refused to give up. With every ounce of strength left in him, he continued to fight, each attack more desperate than the last. Dante sighed, stepping back to avoid another furious swing. "You know," he began, stretching his arms casually, "I could have ended this a long time ago, but I wanted you to see it. I wanted you to see just how far you've fallen." As if on cue, Dante disappeared and reappeared instantaneously. He was carrying the governor's dead daughter in his arms like a fallen bride. His mouth contorted sadly. "She's dead. She really is dead. Your granddaughter. The reason why you became a corrupted bastard. The reason why you became the same people you loathed. The reason why you abandoned us all to protect her, to give her a better life, to nurture her. Is this not it? Is this not it, Salmondel, iron wall of the military? Dante's face crumpled into dark disgust. A sage. A mere sage is all you were able to amount to. You could have been the strongest if only you didn't stop chasing. Neglecting the cries of the lieutenant, the sight of her only reignited the governor's fury. But his body was betraying him, his movements growing slower, his energy draining with every failed attack. The purple aura around the lampstand began to flicker, weakening as the governor's strength gave out. His swings became sluggish, and finally, with one last, pitiful attempt, he swung the glowing weapon at Dante. The strike was weak, drained of all power, and Dante didn't even need to dodge. The lampstand slipped from the governor's hands and clattered to the ground. He stood there for a moment, his body trembling, barely able to keep himself upright. Blood dripped from his wounds, pooling at his feet, and his breathing was shallow, ragged. Dante watched him, still carrying the governor's daughter, before casually tossing her body to the ground in front of him. The governor collapsed to his knees, staring at her lifeless form. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the blood and dirt on his skin. He reached out with trembling hands, trying to touch her, but his strength was gone. "Please," the governor whispered, his voice barely audible now. "Not her. Please." Dante's grin widened. "You know, Mentor, I never did care for sentimentality. But watching you now, it almost makes me feel something. Almost." With a swift motion, Dante pulled out his sword from where it was buried, the blade gleaming in the dim light. He stepped forward, raising it above the governor's head. "In the end, you are still a crybaby." His face struggled for a bit as he heard the governor's voice echo in his ears. He frowned with determination barely a bit later. "You were a good teacher," Dante said softly, his voice devoid of mockery for the first time. "But all things must end." The sword came down, swift and precise, and with that final strike, the governor's body cleaved into two equal halves, blood gushing out furiously. Dante wiped the blade clean and sheathed it, standing amidst the destruction, his expression returning to its usual cold detachment. The wind picked up once more, carrying away the dust and debris of the fallen estate. Chapter 550. It is not enough. Northern could feel it. His body was reading it as much as he was trying his best to read it with his mind. It was just like when he had fought with Night Terror. Every difficult threat was perceived by his body and was, in a way, overcome. This one, of course, was taking longer because it was a very intricate ability. One that he could not even figure out completely how it worked. Northern had first thought about using Erasure to lock the elf's ability. But it wouldn't be a fair ability. Honestly, he wanted to consider deleting the ability, because there was no fun in locking an opponent's ability. Right now, what he wanted was for them to fight with their full strength. Let them give it their all, so he could crush their peak and climb above it. That way, he would enjoy crushing them more. His eyes glinted with malicious enjoyment as he thought about it. But something kept bothering Northern. Why was Void Force failing? Why? Amidst his puzzled thoughts, the elf came again, silent as ever, his blade of wind materializing out of thin air. Northern's body instinctively reacted, dodging to the side, but once again, he felt the familiar sting as the invisible attack grazed him. Blood trickled down his arm, but Northern's grin widened, his mind racing. He had faced entities whose power dwarfed this elf's, and each time he had come out on top. This was no different. Except, it was, "Why can't I sense it again?" Northern muttered under his breath, his gaze locking onto the elf as the wind shifted once more, obscuring the cult leader's presence. His void force should have activated by now, stretching the distance between him and the threat. But the attacks slipped through, bypassing his defense. The elf appeared again, this time with a wicked grin. "Struggling, aren't you?" he taunted, his voice carried by the wind. "Your abilities and speed are useless against the gale. You're not as invincible as you think." Northern's eyes narrowed, We'll see about that. The elf disappeared once more, but this time Northern was prepared. He closed his eyes, shutting out the distraction of the swirling winds, and focused. His void force wasn't reacting because it couldn't register the attack. The wind wasn't just hiding the elf, it was masking the intent behind the attack itself. Whispering Gale was manipulating not just the air, but the pressure around the attacks, displacing them just enough that Northern's ability couldn't fully comprehend them as immediate threats. It was like trying to grasp smoke. By the time you felt it, it was already gone. Northern's eyes shot open. So that's it. He couldn't rely on void force to save him this time. He'd have to fight without it, at least until he could break through the elf's wind distortion. It was a good thing I met Jeskai that time. If not, this would have been quite an issue. Northern could fight without having to use the void force. And he could fight very well, so to say. The elf struck again, a gust of wind slicing toward Northern's back. This time, Northern moved preemptively, twisting his body just before the pressure built up, avoiding the brunt of the attack. The wind grazed his shoulder, but the cut was shallow. "You're getting desperate," Northern called out, his voice cold. "If you think this wind is enough to stop me, you're wrong." The elf reappeared in front of him, his face twisted in anger. "You dismissed the one thing that was keeping you safe from my attacks. How foolish of you. You can never beat me." He wasn't surprised the man noticed void force. In fact, he now understood why the elf had been attacking the way he had been. It was quite obvious. He had understood from the beginning that his normal attacks would never reach Northern. "He is a brilliant fighter, I wouldn't lie." Northern for a moment was caught in amusement. Northern's grin returned, sharp and dangerous. "I don't need void force to crush you." The elf's eyes flared with fury, and the winds around him intensified, whipping into a frenzy. The air pressure grew heavy, suffocating, and Northern felt the weight of the whispering gale closing in on him from all sides. The elf was going all out now. Northern's grip tightened on Stainless, his mind clearing. He had been holding back, trying to figure out the elf's tricks. But now there was no need for that. He had learned enough. As the elf vanished once more into the wind, Northern made his move. His body blurred with speed, his enhanced physical abilities pushing him beyond the limits of most beings. He wasn't waiting for the attack this time, he was going on the offensive. The elf reappeared to strike, but Northern was already there. His blade met the elf's wind blade, and the air crackled with energy as the two forces collided. But Northern didn't stop. He twisted, bringing Stainless down in a devastating arc, black flames erupting from the sword and scorching the ground. The elf leaped back, but Northern followed, his movements fluid and relentless. Each strike was faster, more precise, pushing the elf further and further back. The cult leader's once confident expression was beginning to falter. "You're impossible," the elf spat, his voice trembling with frustration as he tried to keep up with Northern's relentless assault. Northern's grin widened. "Now, I'm just getting started." He swung Stainless once more, this time aiming not for the elf, but for the air itself. Black flames exploded outward, disrupting the flow of the wind and scattering the whispering gale. The elf's control over the wind faltered for a split second. And that was all Northern needed. In a blur of motion, he closed the distance between them, driving his knee into the elf's gut. The cult leader gasped in pain, his wind blade flickering and fading as his concentration broke. Northern didn't let up. He grabbed the elf by the collar, lifting him off the ground with one hand, his eyes cold and merciless. "I told you," Northern said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're not as clever as you think." The elf struggled, trying to summon the wind again, but Northern's grip tightened, and his presence overwhelmed the cult leader. The winds began to die down, the air growing still around them. "You can't stop the wind," the elf choked out, his voice barely a whisper. Northern's grin turned into a sneer. "Watch me." With a final, brutal motion, Northern slammed the elf into the ground, the impact cracking the stone beneath them. The cult leader's body went limp, his control over the wind shattering completely. Northern stared down at the elf with a cold intensity. He raised his sword up, pointing its edge towards the elf. His eyes glowed with the cold light of a killer's gaze. As he was about to drive the blade into the elf's throat, a voice suddenly called, "Northern!" His sword stopped just at the throat of the elf. "What have you done, Northern?" Shin stared around, horrified at the way bodies in pools of blood littered the ground. Northern furrowed his brows and raised his head nonchalantly. "You have copied talent Whispering Gale? A. For 600 talent fragments. Chapter 551 Broken Soul. Even though they had fled the mansion as fast as they could still feel the paralyzing pressure of the lieutenant's essence. Shin was, at the very least, glad that Northern had taken off on his own. Ryan was easy to manage. All Shin had to do was say, with a serious face, "We need to go now," and Ryan complied. But who knew what his precious, powerful, and super-confident son would have tried to pull in a situation like this. So, Shin sincerely gave thanks to Ul and the Constellation for their safety. As they ran, the ground shook with tremors, and the sound of crashing clouds reverberated in the air from the mansion. They glanced back but did not stop. Their destination? Obviously, the church where Northern had claimed Aisha was being kept. It still made no sense to Shin, and he didn't think they should be bursting into a holy church. That was why he wanted to get there as fast as possible, to step in before Northern did anything rash, and, hopefully, at all costs, prevent him from crossing paths with the lieutenant. However, he had greatly underestimated Northern's speed of action. When he reached the church gate, his eyes trembled. The great statue had completely collapsed, and someone's leg could be seen beneath it. A pool of blood spread from underneath. Shin's face twisted in horror as he looked around. The place looked like someone had forcibly ripped the ground out from beneath it, and now, he began to wonder if he should really be giving thanks to the Constellation or begging for forgiveness. It seemed that wherever Northern went, havoc followed. "What the hell happened here?" Alistran muttered, his face trembling. But Shin didn't wait to respond. Instead, he took off, flying over the gate and shooting toward the upheaved ground, following the strong stench of blood. As he got closer, the smell of blood grew even stronger. Finally, he stood above the ground and saw his son slowly raising his sword. Instinctively, Shin shouted, "Northern!" Northern's face, cold and indifferent, folded into a slight frown, showing his displeasure at the sound of his father's voice. "What have you done?" Shin's thick, shaky tone broke into fragments. His eyes scanned the entire area, taking in the gruesome scene of people lying in pools of their own blood. Shortly after, Alistran and Ryan arrived, and Alistran's eyes widened in disbelief. Elves. They're all elves. It was unbelievable to him that a young boy could single-handedly kill so many elves. Is he not a master? Was he lying about his rank? Alistran wondered. It made no sense to him. There was no way this level of bloodshed, wrought by a kid, should be possible. No matter how exceptional he was. If he was truly a master, a massacre like this should never have happened. Ryan, however, seemed like the only one who wasn't shocked. Shin jumped down into the underground. "Northern, did you kill all these people?" he asked, his eyes begging for a negative answer. "Some of them aren't dead," Northern responded coldly. He didn't know why, but he felt no remorse for killing them. Even with Shin questioning him, Northern still felt nothing. He didn't even feel sorry for the poor souls he had slaughtered. Glancing down and ignoring the horrified expression on his adopted father's face, Northern grabbed an elf by the neck and raised him up. "Where is my mother?" The elf struggled to speak, lingering for a moment before managing to wring out a few words. "Cretin, you know nothing. This is just the beginning." He coughed up blood as he finished speaking. Northern frowned and extended his lightning odachi, but stopped as Shin yelled, "Northern, please, no more killing. Let me handle this." Northern paused, a dark frown on his face. He released his grip on the elf, causing the man to slump to his knees. Shin inhaled deeply, exhaling heavily, then walked toward the kneeling elf. Glancing at Northern cautiously, he said, "I'm sorry I doubted you. It's fine. Things were much easier for me that way." Northern's words carried no hint of emotion, making Shin's heart sink with heaviness. Northern stepped back while Shin moved closer to the elf. He knelt, his eyes weighing heavily across the bloody scene. What broke his heart the most was the thought that his son, who wasn't even 18 years old, had caused this disaster, and there was nothing Shin, as a supposedly responsible father, could do about it. He was sure Northern hadn't just been killing, and that was likely why he didn't feel anything, even though so many had died by his hands. Shin, more than anyone, knew the weight of murder, how hollow it made one feel, how it drained the soul, and the dread it instilled, slowly guiding a person toward a path of destruction. For him, Aisha had been the warm light that saved him, pulling him back from that dread. But who was going to save his son? Now, he felt like he was beginning to understand the magnitude of Northern's change. And the more he understood, the sadder he became. He looked at the elf. "Where is Aisha? You insolent humans, stealing what belongs to a divine existence." "My wife belongs to no one," Shin shouted, his hand inches away from strangling the man. He was shaking with so much anger that his outstretched hand trembled, and sweat trickled down his face. He dropped his hand, grabbing the man's armor tiredly, leaning on it, his voice breaking sorrowfully. "Please, I beg you, just let her go." So many things had broken Shin's soul, and he didn't want to choose violence anymore, especially not with his son watching. Violence was the one thing Aisha had saved him from, and even though he had a justifiable reason, saving his wife and child, it still felt wrong to throw away all she had taught him. If she saw all this, her heart would break. The elf, unperturbed by Shin's state, slowly raised his head, a malicious grin spreading across his face. "If the princess won't return home, then you shall have no home either," he yelled, yanking an item from his armor. Northern's eyes widened instantly. He wanted to step forward to stop the elf and would have been fast enough to knock the item from the cult leader's hand. But he stopped mid-movement, a small smile appearing on his face. The elf clenched the item in his hand and smashed it. Immediately, an enormous amount of soul essence burst out, swallowing the entire scene in a vortex of swirling essence, looking like a mass of blue flames raging in circles. Instantaneously, the lieutenant suddenly turned his gaze westward, his expression darkening. A rift. A man with long black hair walked up to him, bowing his head. "My lord, he is here, the linchpin I spoke of." Lieutenant Dante raised his chin with a confident grin. "I see. My cause must be truly favored by the constellation. Everything is falling in place for me." Chapter 552. Disaster. Northern leaped as quickly as he could away from the swelling ball of essence, grabbing Alistran and Ryan and throwing them clear with incredibly quick reflexes. He didn't wait for Alistran's shocked reaction or Ryan's nonchalance before darting toward the violent vortex. As it swelled, it raged, viciously sucking everything into it. It was like a sentient vortex, a black hole, wanting to devour every single thing around it. The only difference was that this wasn't a black hole. This was a blue, flaming one. Jessie, Linus. As Northern called their names, two blurs flashed out of his shadow and into the swelling energy. Northern then dissolved into the shadows. Using Shadow Step, he appeared in the next room, where a woman lay on a comfortable mattress with a wrapped baby gently beside her. He instantly recognized his mother. He moved closer and touched her hand. They were cold, and for some reason, she was unconscious, not waking despite his touch. Whatever they had done to her was the reason he couldn't sense her presence. He glanced around the room, examining it. Runes of different characters were crudely carved on the walls. So this is what's keeping her unconscious. Northern stood up, lifted his mother onto his shoulders, and then picked up the child with one hand. He gazed at her for a moment, admiring her black hair. Just like Shin. Even though she was fast asleep, the striking resemblance between the child and Shin was undeniable. He smiled bitterly and entered the shadows again. This time, he didn't appear outside but instead in the Void Palace. He walked toward one of the pillars, stepping into the darkness between them. He opened a door to a luxurious room, which materialized the moment he did so. It looked more modern than most bedrooms of their time. The bed was large and covered with a thick, silken duvet, its silver sheen reflecting the dim blue light of the limitless void. The walls shimmered with a soft, pulsating glow, like stars trapped in the fabric of space, while the floor beneath his feet rippled with every step. Northern carefully laid his mother on the bed, tucking the duvet around her with a tenderness that seemed out of place in the chaotic reality he'd just escaped. He then placed the baby in a smaller cradle that materialized beside the bed, its form elegant and carved from an ethereal substance, like shadows molded into wood. He stepped back, watching the steady rise and fall of his mother's chest. It was weak, but she was alive. For now she was safe. But what had been done to her ran deeper than any visible wound, and Northern could feel it. He placed a hand on the cradle, feeling the pulse of life from the child. "You'll be safe here," he whispered. The child stirred slightly but didn't wake. Without a word, Northern vanished into the shadows again, reappearing in the chaos of the vortex. By the time he returned, Shin had already been completely swallowed by it, which was why he had immediately sent Jesai and Linus. Alistran and Ryan, slowly recovering from Northern's powerful throw, came to meet him. Northern focused on the vortex, which had now settled and revealed itself as a rift. His eyes narrowed as he inspected the runes of the rift. With his highly developed sight, reading the soul essence of the rift wasn't difficult. The runes materialized before him, their letters resembling symbols, but he understood them effortlessly. Rift title, 1 of the 10 plagues. Rift tier, 7. Rift information. An arrogant and forgotten ruler has, by his own hands, imbued his realm with disaster. Now it spreads like a disease, like a plague. Rift monsters, Hellions, Maelstrom, Destroyers, Behemoths, Belial. Northern subconsciously staggered back as he read the runes. He steadied himself quickly, controlling his rapid breathing. Destroyers, Behemoths, and a Belial? The highest level threat Northern had ever faced was a destroyer, and he knew what kind of miracle it took to defeat one of those monsters. He had faced destroyers twice, and both times it had taken a miracle to survive. Now they were the least of his worries. There were Behemoths and a damned Belial. He had never even seen what a Behemoth or a Belial looked like. He couldn't even begin to imagine. This overflowing essence. This rift is more than tier 5. Alistran's voice broke his thoughts, drawing Northern's attention to the old Joker's stress-ridden face. Northern sighed. This dude has no idea what he is saying. He looked back at the rift, then at Ryan. "Hey, are you up for this? It'll be tough." Ryan met his gaze coldly and shrugged. "Tough, not tough. Makes no difference to me." Northern grinned widely, satisfied with Ryan's response. As expected of dark continental folks, we just understand each other so well. He grinned inwardly again. He was about to step forward when his body suddenly trembled. His eyes widened and froze. Void force lashed out extensively, draining his stamina and essence to maintain the state of the invisible barrier. Ryan noticed the change in Northern's expression and asked, "What's wrong, Northern?" Alistran also felt the sudden surge of pressure around Northern, making it difficult to approach him. But Ryan had already asked the question. He, too, awaited the answer with bated breath. Northern didn't need to respond. Just as Ryan asked, both men trembled with suffocating fear. A drop of sweat rolled down Alistran's face as he thought, "Damn it! Impressive. You sensed me before I even arrived, even though I perfectly erased my presence." A commanding voice rang out. With it came a presence that stood behind Northern. Northern turned, his face set in a grim frown, toward a tall man dressed in black military attire, his coat fluttering off his shoulder. "Who the hell are you?" Northern spat, his tone laced with venom. Lieutenant Dante caressed his chin, his eyes intrigued as they observed Northern. White hair, blue eyes. What clan are you from? Northern didn't respond. While the lieutenant examined him, his mind raced, searching for a solution. He didn't need to take a soul peek to know he was standing before a paragon. He had met one before. From the first moment he felt the presence of the lieutenant's essence approaching them, it had instantly registered. The essence and its shape belonged to a paragon. Before, he couldn't see it because his eyes hadn't reached that level. But now he could. Swirling around the lieutenant was his essence, shaped into a silver bird so enormous that it nearly shrouded the underground with its wings. Its presence alone seemed to overpower that of the rift, which made Northern certain of two things. 1, this person was undoubtedly a paragon. 2, the chances of defeating this rift just skyrocketed. However, he didn't like this person's aura at all. The lieutenant grabbed Northern's face. Northern hadn't even felt his hand move. It was as though he was helpless before the man's speed. He frowned instantly and bulldozed into the lieutenant with all his strength, sending both of them crashing into the debris behind, crimson flames furiously licking the trails of his legs. Chapter 553, Tug-o-War. Everyone present in the underground chamber stood with wide eyes, stunned. What had just happened? Alistron couldn't believe what he was seeing, and even Ryan showed a rare hint of tension on his face. The lieutenant's subordinates, who had arrived late to the scene, wore expressions of shock, their faces even paler than before. Lieutenant Dante's speed was beyond comprehension for those in this realm, a fact well known to those who had worked and walked alongside him. His speed was so extraordinary that it was safer to accept that one could never truly understand it rather than attempt to. Trying to comprehend it only led to despair, a hopeless realization that a human, like themselves, could move so impossibly fast. Many also claimed that Lieutenant Dante never moved or reacted at his maximum speed. It was rumored that the thread used to sew his uniform was heavier than normal, making his clothing weigh more. He even added a shoulder coat to increase the burden. He wore weighted bangles as well, all in an effort to slow himself down as much as possible. Some even speculated that his speed was a flaw of his talent. He was unnaturally fast, unbeatable in any race, and untouchable in battle. No one had ever managed to land a hit on him. However, what they had just witnessed with their own eyes was something else entirely. Before their very eyes, they had seen their lieutenant fly, a blurred line, and crash into a pile of stones opposite the rift. It left them speechless, their mouths agape. A red-haired woman suddenly scowled. That bastard! She gritted her teeth and shot toward the place where the lieutenant had crashed. However, the entire ground instantly froze, causing her steps to slip. She turned into an uncoordinated ballet dancer and embarrassed herself, falling on her head. Everyone found the sight slightly amusing, but no one dared to laugh. They were sure that a second ago the ground had been plain and rough, but now it looked like an ice skating rink. Alistron, his face drawn, slowly creaked his head back. He did this? Damn it! I forgot he's just as bad. Ryan stood indifferently behind him, staring with a lifeless expression on his face. The atmosphere was abruptly interrupted by a powerful tremor that disintegrated the pile of debris into small chunks of stone and sent cracks across the frozen ground. A pressure, capable of grinding them down, wafted along with the wind, feeling like a mountain falling upon their heads. They bowed and struggled to look straight, and Alistron and Ryan were no different. In fact, Ryan seemed more affected. As he tried to resist, he was pushed all the way to his knees, coughing up blood. Fool, you can't resist the lieutenant's aura. One of them muttered. He was equally in pain from the aura but took pleasure in seeing Ryan suffer as the pressure damaged him. As the cloud of debris cleared, their eyes all focused on one thing. Two figures in the cloud, whose silhouettes slowly revealing. The lieutenant was standing tall, his head slightly raised in dark amusement, while the white-haired boy in front of him stood unperturbed, glaring into his eyes. Good, good. You have to be at that level to be of use to me. Lieutenant Dante's voice rang out, tinged with a malicious dominance. It wasn't that Northern didn't feel the intense pressure of the man standing before him. In fact, Every fiber of his body screamed in protest. The only positive was that with each passing second, he could feel the effect of his resistance growing. But the recoil on his muscles was intense. It felt as if the pressure were ripping the fibers of his muscles apart like paper. With a grave expression, Northern stared into the red eyes of the lieutenant. "You want to play a game of Aura? Well then, let's play a game of Aura." His voice growled, slightly strained, but it carried sufficient intimidation. The lieutenant's subordinate, who had been mocking Ryan earlier, was caught in a whirlwind of disbelief. How can this be possible? He felt his excitement fade, as everything suddenly ceased to make sense. There was someone capable of standing beneath the lieutenant's intense aura. And not just standing, he was closer to the lieutenant than they all were. The pressure in that area should have been suffocating. And yet, the human, who didn't even appear as old as him, was withstanding it. He gritted his teeth in pain, his eyes gleaming with envy. "If only I had a better talent," he thought. The thought had barely finished when an intense and cold presence mixed with the one already terrorizing them. Then the tug of war began. The air in the chamber thickened, charged with invisible currents of power. Northern's void aura expanded like an unseen storm, crashing against the oppressive force emanating from Lieutenant Dante. Their auras clashed violently, sending ripples through the very fabric of the atmosphere. The subterranean walls groaned under the pressure, tiny cracks spidering across the stone, as though the chamber itself were caught in the duel between two titans. Lieutenant Dante's aura, already a suffocating weight, grew denser, like a mountain collapsing onto Northern. It bore down with brutal intensity, capable of reducing most to their knees in an instant. His subordinates, still bowing under the force, trembled even more as the struggle intensified. The air burned with the lieutenant's dominance, his power commanding absolute submission. However, Northern's void aura was different, an enigma that didn't crush but consumed. Where Dante's pressure was a hammer, Northern's was an abyss. It didn't meet force with force. It absorbed it, distorted it. The very space around Northern seemed to warp, reality bending and twisting as if it couldn't decide whether to stay intact. For a moment there was a stalemate. The clash between Dante's overwhelming dominance and Northern's unfathomable void created a vacuum of silence, like the eye of a hurricane. Then that stillness snapped. The ground beneath Northern fractured, splitting under his feet as the void aura began to assert itself. Dante's red eyes flashed with a flicker of surprise, brief but unmistakable. His lips curled into a delighted smile, and suddenly, his aura disappeared. As he released it, the already breaking walls and stones shattered into fragments. Northern also retracted his void aura, staggering back a few steps but managing to stand in place before he lost his balance. His gaze remained grave, the intense light in his eyes undimmed. The lieutenant leaned on one hand against his sword and extended the other toward Northern. "I am Lieutenant Dante, leader of the Revolutionary Army. Can you tell me who you are and what your rank is?" Lieutenant Dante's tone was calm, still carrying a hint of dominance but sounding as though he was addressing an equal. Northern could feel the respect in both his tone and his eyes. Barely meeting this man had left his entire body sore with pain. What the hell would fighting him do? Northern. He thought of using another name, but Northern was being cautious. His ties to Riemgard were not a chapter he was ready to confront. Hence, he wanted to keep everything about it secret. He hadn't even told Shin. "Oh, that's an odd name, Northern. And your rank?" "I am a master." Lieutenant Dante's eyes flew open. "No way. You're lying." Northern's brows lowered into a tense frown. "Why would I lie?" The lieutenant was silent for a few seconds, his eyes still wide with surprise. He then said, "With what I saw just now, I seriously thought you would be at least an ascendant." "Sorry to disappoint you then," Northern muttered in displeasure. "No, don't take it the wrong way, young lad. I'm not disappointed. I'm very impressed." The lieutenant paused for a beat, observing Northern keenly. Then he suggested, his tone subtle and charming, How about we beat this rift together, and we can get to know each other while we do that? Northern glanced at Ryan. He had no reason to refuse, and this was a great opportunity to steal another Paragon's talent. He was sure that this rift would offer a lot of fragments. He had expended everything on copying the cult leader's talent, so he could just rack up talents and copy yet another Paragon's. But beyond that, this rift was going to be the most difficult, gut-wrenching rift he had ever entered. He could feel it in every dark corner of his soul. Chapter 554. Something Different, Part 1. Northern stared at the lieutenant suspiciously. After a few minutes of silence, he responded. You would be a big boon to the team. I'm honored to participate in this raid with you. His tone was empty, but his carefully chosen words took Lieutenant Dante by surprise. Judging by how you pushed me, I assumed you were a thoughtless and arrogant kid. Then, for a minute, you managed to convince me you're not just arrogant. And now you're convincing me you might not be thoughtless after all. Northern bowed his head slightly. I'm sorry I pushed you. You touched my face. Nobody touches my face. The lieutenant raised a brow, carefully observing Northern and his drastically changed attitude. To be honest, it bothered him a bit. He felt like he would have preferred Northern to remain arrogant, acting like the kid he was. But now, this swift change, it almost felt like he was talking to someone of his own mental age. That was extremely unsettling. Dante swallowed and let out a small smile. All right then. He looked around, sizing up his colleagues, then called, Hansel. Yes, sir. A tall, robust man with a low cut, almost resembling a macho robot, answered swiftly. Shane. Here, sir. The red-haired lady who had embarrassed herself earlier swiftly stood up and bent at the waist, bowing respectfully as she answered the lieutenant. The lieutenant took a moment as he decided on the last person to call, his eyes carefully scanning the rest of his 7 immediate subordinates who had managed to come with him. Raphael. Yes, sir. An introverted-looking young man with dark blue hair covering part of his face answered, standing attentively. The lieutenant then faced the rest with a solid, authoritative look. The rest of you protect that damn shaman. Yes, sir. They all chorused and dispersed, flashing away in different directions. Dante then looked at Northern with a small smile on his lips. Is this team okay? Northern shrugged. I don't see any problem. He turned around and walked toward the gate. Ryan moved to his side, while Alistran wore a look of indecision. But given the tight situation he found himself in, he didn't think there was room to opt out. If he didn't want unnecessary attention from the lieutenant, it was better to just enter and somehow survive. Even now, he was still hesitant, his legs unsure of where to move. Northern and Ryan were the first to enter the rift. The swirling portal rippled as their frames sank into it. Alistran glanced at Dante, who seemed to be gazing deep into the rift with an intrigued look plastered on his face, a hand caressing his chin. Ignoring all thoughts and focusing solely on survival, Alistran also entered the rift. Then Dante and his 3 subordinates headed toward the rift as well. As Northern entered the rift, the first thing he saw was an endless expanse of a blood-red sky. Then his head lowered, his eyes falling on the murky and slimy crimson ground. It reminded him of the first rift he had been in. But this one was nothing like that rift. The ground of this one seemed like murky, slimy water that perfectly reflected the blood-soaked blanket above it. Northern and Ryan looked at each other for a second, both awkwardly silent. That's right. We've never really been together alone, separately. Northern didn't think he had ever spoken to Ryan while they were in the Dark Continent. You know. Ryan's voice suddenly cut through the silence with cold intensity. I don't really like you. Oh? That's quite the news, Northern replied with a small chuckle. His face quickly contorted back to seriousness as he started surveying the way forward. Ryan frowned slightly, walked to catch up with him, and inquired, You're not going to ask why? Why should I ask why? I don't really care. You were very close to Lady Raven. Northern suddenly paused, a corner of his lips curving slightly in displeasure. Damn Raven. Do you have plans to ever let me be? Northern finally forced out a full smile, which even reached his eyes. I see you're part of the Raven fan club. I am never going to forgive you for being so close to her. Ryan's voice sounded like it was grinding against something hard as he added, and for abandoning her. Northern nodded, his smile sweet and satisfied. That I can trust. I've decided to start trusting people who hold a grudge against me more than those who don't. Your dear Lady Raven taught me that. Northern paused briefly, but continued as Ryan was about to speak. Look, you can save me all that nonsense. I really don't give a damn. If you're that mad about it, we can settle the score right now, fight to the death. Northern's look was resolute, his words carrying undeniable weight. Ryan frowned for a moment, then sighed, releasing the tension from his brow and slowly returning to his usual blank expression. Then he responded, I just wanted to let you know, so it won't come as a surprise when I stab you in the back. Northern nodded. Thank you for the heads up. I appreciate it. Then a slight furrow appeared between his white brows, and he raised one. Shouldn't that annoying man and his soldiers be here by now? And Alistran? Ryan looked back at where they had first appeared. There was no portal anymore. You're right. That would mean this rift transported us to a different location. Northern narrowed his eyes. It wasn't an unusual situation. Rifts had several characteristics, many of which even he didn't know. The rift could have hidden its entrance or possibly locked it permanently, meaning they'd have to defeat the rift core to escape, which was the original reason they had entered the rift. So, theoretically and logically, Northern felt like everything was right. However, something kept tugging at the back of his mind. Something was definitely wrong. Northern glanced around the rift, carefully examining it. His eyes alone were enough for the inspection. He didn't want to use Chaos Eyes just yet. Not when he was faced with ranks of monsters he had never encountered before. It was better to be cautious. Then suddenly his eyes flinched. He extended his hand, and sparks began to manifest, forming a long staff with curved blades at both ends. Beyond the horizon, where the ground merged seamlessly with the crimson sky, a mass of four-legged creatures with rotting, red skin and hollow, empty eyes ran, making the entire ground tremble at their insane march for gore.
Chapter 555, Menace.
Northern exhaled gently as the march of monsters drew closer. He twirled Grenger and glared forward, a wicked light igniting in his blue gaze. However, Ryan stepped in front of him, causing Northern to frown slightly and ask, What do you think you're doing? I'm better suited for handling things like this. Northern narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? Ryan slowly extended both hands forward like a maestro, closing his eyes. I guess you haven't seen the peak of ice manipulation. I'll show it to you. He fell silent and waited. Behind him, Northern relaxed from his ready stance and took 2 large steps back, keenly observing the quieter warrior. He was curious. He knew how impressive Ryan's talent was, but he didn't know if he had ever seen it at its best. Perhaps this demonstration would be the deciding factor in whether to forsake 5 talents for this single one. He watched attentively. Ryan remained motionless in his maestro pose, even as the tremor of the marching monsters caused the murky waters to ripple violently, dancing ugly patterns. But Ryan's stance was resolute and sturdy. He didn't move an inch. It was almost as if he were a statue. Then Northern noticed something as he looked down. His brows furrowed slightly. His legs are freezing? Ice was spreading from Ryan's legs to the ground, freezing the murky waters around him. Ryan flung his eyes open, and speckles of ice stars began to swirl around him. Northern's eyes widened. Is that the form of his essence? He could tell what it was clearly, having advanced that far himself. His eyes also played a factor. When one becomes a master, they can cultivate their essence and give it a form. Of course, this was different from the shape of the soul, but it was one of the factors that contributed to the personality of one's soul, which in the long run determines the shape of the soul. Northern had tried when he first became a master. The best he could do was circulate his essence. He hadn't been able to give it a definite form like Ryan was doing now. With the essence taking form, One could launch attacks or defend solely using the essence. Not to mention the great boost it adds to the execution of one's talent abilities. Just like what Northern was about to witness. Ryan's gaze fell coldly on the oncoming rush of abominations. Then coldly, with freezing vapor smoking from his mouth, he invoked ice manipulation. Stalemate. Whoosh. In a swift burst, the frozen ground beneath Ryan blasted forward with explosive force, covering everything in front of him in a hurricane of ice. Spears of ice shot out in every direction from the frozen ground, impaling the rotting monsters and spilling crimson gore. The ice spears erupted in rapid succession, filling every space so that no monster could escape unscathed. Their heads were pierced, or their ribs shattered, or their abdomens and necks sliced, all in a quick and near-flashing moment as the frozen land spread. Northern stood in silent, unreadable awe at the spectacle unfolding before him. He let out a small, hidden smile. "I've decided. No, it's worth it. I want this." His mind raced with the desire for Ryan's talent. Ryan sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly as he staggered, but Northern supported him with a light touch. "Are you sure it's okay to use so much essence? We're in a Tier 7 rift." Ryan frowned. "Tier 7? How did you know?" "I can tell with my eyes." "You're a scout? There's no way you're a scout and can fight like that." Northern sighed. "I'm a lot of things, boy." Somehow, Ryan felt offended. He frowned at Northern, wanting to object, but let it go and turned to the havoc he had wreaked ahead. "You should have told me. Using this much essence so early is definitely dangerous." Northern shrugged, his eyes teasing. "I don't think you gave me enough time to even have an opinion." He spun Grenger and strode forward. "What are you doing?" Ryan asked, a pensive look on his face. "You've had your fun. Now let me have mine," Northern said as a clone appeared beside him, holding Stainless. Another clone manifested, wielding the dark mortal blade. With him in the middle, a whirlwind of black sparks enveloped him, slowly forming the Night Terror armor. Northern paused for a moment, his gaze falling on the single dent in the armor. It intensely vexed him. "I should find a blacksmith after this rift." He spun the dual-bladed staff once more and leaned his upper body forward. Ryan was first confused. He was sure he had killed every monster coming. But suddenly, his landscape of crude ice thorns exploded as a new wave of monsters pushed through with obscene force, plunging thoughtlessly into everything before them, not caring whether it killed them or not. "Oh well." Northern's eyes gleamed as he grinned. Then he took off. The frozen ground shattered completely, ice shards shooting in all directions as he threw himself into the throng of monsters. He spun Grenger as he moved, and a cyclone of disaster began. His two clones shot in different directions, bringing their weapons down upon the abominations. Their swords bit deep, crudely carving through the monsters and creating arcs of blood. Their movements were fluid, more so than any time Northern had used his clones before, blending seamlessly with his attacks. Northern himself was a menace on the battlefield. Despite the advantage of numbers, it meant nothing. His movements were untraceable. Before the monsters could turn to face him, he was already gone, and their heads were falling. With every cyclonic spin, his curved blades lacerated flesh and sprayed gore. When a massive number of monsters surrounded him from all sides, Northern extended a finger to his face, a grin of enjoyment playing on his lips. Gravity finger. All the monsters around him were suddenly crushed under intense pressure, their bodies ground into meatballs. "You have slain a disastrous hellion, Rabid Rot. You have gained +4 talent fragments. You have slain a disastrous hellion, Rabid Rot. You have gained +4 talent fragments. You have slain a disastrous hellion, Rabid Rot. You have gained +4 talent fragments." The notifications became music to his ears as he and his clones continued their rampage in every direction. Chapter 556. Something Different, Part 2. How strange. The lieutenant's voice carried a subtle concern while radiating interest at the same time. They were standing in the middle of literal nothingness, shrouded by a blood-red sky and a ground that seemed like the remnants of the sky's drool. His hand moved beneath his nose, gently caressing it while simultaneously blocking the throat-violating stench that assaulted their senses. "My liege, I will scout the area with Raphael," Shane, the red-haired lady, quickly suggested, bowing her head before the lieutenant. Without paying much attention to her, he waved his wrist nonchalantly, giving her permission. Immediately, with her scarlet, blood-seeking eyes, she glared toward the introverted Raphael, making him almost shrink in response. Both of them vanished at nearly the same time. Lieutenant Dante glanced at the sky, his eyelids half closed, then shifted his gaze around. That was when he caught sight of an outsider. "Oh, dog, you're here." "Lieutenant." Alistran bowed his head, pressing his lips together in bitter regret. "What kind of luck is this? I should have just stayed back. Curse you, Thalen. This is going to be an experience worse than death." He and Lieutenant Dante, along with the entire Therian Citadel, had once had a dispute over rift rights. But in the end, a common goal had led them to overlook their differences and defeat the city of Shang together. His unwavering loyalty to Thalen and Therian Citadel had earned him the title Dog from the lieutenant. And what Alistran had seen of the lieutenant that day made him earnestly wish they never crossed paths again. And back then he wasn't even a paragon. Moreover, though he couldn't be sure, nor could he dare ask, the fact that the lieutenant was here unperturbed probably meant he had killed the governor. And if a lieutenant in the army had killed the governor of a city, it could only mean one thing. And that one thing was exactly what Alistran did not want to get mixed up in. Damn it. All I wanted was to earn a lot of money, retire, and settle down on Sassex's Green Island. But his dreams were more likely to go up in flames now that he had met the devil. "What's with the respect? Because your owner isn't here." Alistran forced a flawlessly polite smile. "The last time we met, you were an ascendant. Now, you're a paragon and a lieutenant too, of course. I have to be polite and lick your boots." The lieutenant's expression remained blank, though a glint of disdain flickered in his eyes. His mouth down-curved, and he looked away. "Whatever. That boy with white hair. Who is he to you?" The lieutenant's red eyes rolled over to Alistran. With his head bowed, Alistran wasn't looking at the man's face, but he could still feel the thorny pressure settling on him. Goosebumps rose across his skin. "He is a temporary member of the Citadel, one of the recently arrived survivors of the Dark Continent." Lieutenant Dante's eyes widened slowly, a light of many colors dancing in their depths, as if he had just witnessed the stars at their most beautiful. "No wonder. Incredible. Incredible." He smiled and touched Alistran's shoulder. "Raise your head, dog." Alistran bit down on his lips but rose with a forced smile, baring his teeth. "I like him. I want him. But I can already tell he's not going to be easy to win over. Still, I sincerely want him to fight for me. What pointers can you give me?" Alistran's expression went blank. "What?" He wasn't expecting that last sentence, so he was thrown into an extremely confusing situation. What is happening right now? Lieutenant Dante, who, a second ago, had been a ferocious and unreadable beast, had suddenly become harmless and almost like a child. His entire demeanor had changed. His eyes now carried a gentle tenderness, reflecting sincere earnestness. The atmosphere became so relaxed that Alistran felt like he could speak rudely to him and get away with it. But who would dare? He stuttered through his first few words. I actually don't know." He sharply felt the lieutenant's gaze shift. "But Shin Kageyama Shin is his father, so I guess he would know best?" Ooh! The lieutenant's strange gaze vanished almost instantly, replaced by a pleased smile. "Is that so? Shin Kageyama? Huh? That's comforting. It was a good thing I decided to let you guys live back then." Good. The robust subordinate stood like a statue, his gaze fixed on the wind, not daring to look in the lieutenant's direction at all. "So where is he?" "The Kageyama boy." By appearance alone, the age difference between Shin and Lieutenant Dante seemed no more than 2 or 3 years. Either Dante was older or Shin was. But the way the lieutenant regarded not just Shin but everyone made him seem much older than he looked, perhaps in his 40s. Shin got sucked into the rift when it appeared. Oh? So he's probably in this rift too. Yes, sir. The lieutenant suddenly averted his gaze from Alistron and craned his neck, a slight frown forming on his brow. Hansel. Yes, Lieutenant. Hansel's voice resounded like the impact of a mighty stone crashing onto the ground. Go after Shane and Raphael. Something feels very different about this rift. If I'm right about this ominous feeling, then we're in a Tier 7 rift. Alistron's eyes widened. Tier 7? What? I'm dead. I've never been to a Tier 7 rift before. His mind completely shattered. Damn. Am I going to die? But this is very strange. The lieutenant's sharp voice cut through Alistron's thoughts, making him glance at him. A Tier 7 rift is rare these days. One suddenly appearing in Arcadia is highly unusual. Though terrified of getting on the wrong side of a paragon, Alistron hesitated briefly before voicing his question in broken words. Sir, have you ever been in a Tier 7 rift? He was sweating. Alistron wasn't just sweating out of fear of offending a paragon with his question. The reality of his situation weighed heavily on him. He hadn't signed up for any of this. His mind was reeling with harsh regret. Have I been in a Tier 7 rift? Well, yes, I have. Once. Alistron's words, though still broken, continued. And how many survived? Lieutenant Dante responded with a wistful expression. Just me, because I could run. Chapter 557. Can't make any promises. Alistron felt his whole body go cold instantly. The lieutenant's next words weren't much comfort. Well, I was an ascendant then. I was young and arrogant. We had no paragon in our team, and my arrogance caused the deaths of many. This one will not be like that. I was sure I'd come back home alive. Alistron thought, his mind already shattered, barely listening. The lieutenant glanced at him, his face contorting with irritation before looking away, just as his subordinates reappeared. Their breaths were ragged, short, and heavy. My liege, this place is Gehenna. Lieutenant Dante, despite the grave looks on their faces and the weight of the news they delivered, didn't seem fazed at all. Tell me, word for word, what you saw, he said, focusing on Raphael, who was looking down with sweat pouring down his face. Sir, in the center of the rift, there's an uncountable number of Hellion-rank monsters. They're four-legged with long, curved needle-like teeth, and they don't seem to have eyes, but their hollow sockets somehow still see. They saw us, I felt it. They saw us, but they didn't even care. The lieutenant tilted his head slightly. They didn't care? Why? Shane continued. Because of the statue situated in their middle. Statue? To be exact, sir, it wasn't a statue, Raphael clarified. He was the primary scout, possessing the ability to peer into a monster's soul and gauge their ranks, among other skills. It was a destroyer-rank monster, specifically a catastrophic destroyer. The lieutenant raised an eyebrow. A catastrophic destroyer? That's impossible. There's no way a monster of that danger level should be in a Tier 7 rift. Unless the Gate Guardian is Apex level. The lieutenant narrowed his eyes, a hint of unease reflecting in them. He eventually exhaled and composed his expression. I think I understand what's wrong with this rift. I've been in rifts more than 100 times, and I can tell you one thing. Not once has the Rift Guardian ever been Apex level. A devil, in fact, has never appeared. He paused, resting his hand lightly on his sword hilt as he continued. For monsters to advance in danger level, they have to consume each other or a lot of humans. But since humans aren't always available, the former is usually their go-to. And by doing this, they disrupt their own ecosystem and throw everything into chaos. However, this is typically impossible in a rift because rifts have order and a guardian who values the role of protecting the rift core more than ruling the monster ecosystem. Popular opinion is that this is why no rift guardian is as close as devil level. Because when that happens, the priority shifts from protecting the core to ruling the rift. He took a slightly shaky breath. And when that happens, this rift becomes a blood hole. So, I'm telling you all now, I can't promise everyone will get out of this alive. Own talents. Duplicate. Erasure. Ensair's Ember. Copied talents. Whispering Gale. Those two really did integrate into my body. I'm guessing travel was sort of integrated into Shadow Step. Northern looked at his hands, folding and unfolding them. As he fought, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't using his body to its fullest. But his opponents weren't providing the necessary challenge either. He sighed, his eyes falling on the panel once again. Soul Sight and his only speed talent were gone. One absorbed by chaos, his eyes, the other by void, his soul, both now integrated into his body. Northern didn't feel much loss from using them. Besides the fact that this allowed him to bring out their potential better, he also felt like he could get a better handle on his skills. I have to be actively copying talents. Damn it, I don't even have a cool offensive power. He sat on the pile of corpses he'd created, looking down for a moment as he inspected the new skill he'd just copied. Talent. Whispering Gale. Class. Talent. True. Name. Echoes of the Wind. Description. The wind is a vortex of voices, beckoning upon you for the world yet to be heard, seen, and known. Talent abilities. Veil of Currents. Silent Drift. Razor Breeze. Pressure Shift. Attributes. Wind Stride. Talent Progression. 0/3000. Veil of Currents. Creates a faint, moving air shield around you that distorts your appearance. Silent Drift. Move soundlessly, blending into the natural flow of air to avoid detection. Razor Breeze. Unleash a compressed gust that strikes silently but with slicing force. Whispering Illusions. Create afterimages or faint impressions in the air, making it seem as though you are in multiple places at once. I'm disgusted. What would I ever need this talent for? Really? Northern frowned. He felt like he'd wasted 600 talent fragments. Not every impressive talent he came across was worth copying. Now that he was looking at the details of the talent, he felt it was something he could, in the end, pull off with his chaos eyes. After all, the eyes now allowed him to manipulate subtle natural concepts. He'd done a lot with gravity, being able to reduce or increase it in a controlled area. He had yet to explore other concepts, but he was sure that wind was something he could eventually use. He just needed to think hard and creatively. Speaking of thinking hard and creatively, something occurred to me while I watched that guy use his ability. Northern stood, dismissing the panel before his eyes, and summoned another one. Name. Rian Artemis Riem Guard, Northern Long Guard. True name. Nameless, Superscript 3. Attributes. Formless, Limitless Void, Vestige of Chaos, Chaos Eyes, Chaos Thread, Flames of Chaos, Seed of Void. Soul Rank. Vagrant, Void Summons, 7/100. Talent Fragments, 652/4000. Copied Talents, 1/4. Own Talents, 3. Attribute Abilities, Active/Passive. August 10th. Owned Items, Mortal Blade, Eternal Twilight, Death Glare, and 13 others. Name. Flame of Chaos. Rank. Divine. Description. An ever-burning flame resides within your soul, capable of searing away inconsistencies and irregularities. Due to these ceaseless flames, your soul can never be harmed or consumed. Passive abilities. Soul Damage Resistance, Mind Attack Resistance. Active abilities. Black Flame, Black Lance. Northern pursed his lips as he stared at the part labeled Black Lance and delved into deep thought. Then he raised his eyebrows and took a breath. Oh well, I guess I'll try it with the next wave of monsters. Ryan finally walked up to him, hesitating a moment before speaking. What do we do now? Northern wiped away all the panels with a glance and looked at Ryan for a beat before turning his gaze forward. What else, boy? We move forward. Forward how? And can you please not call me that? We find the Gate Guardian, kill him, and get the hell out of this place. He glanced one more time at Ryan, then strode away. Chapter 558. The Strongest Drifter. The rift was even more expansive and dreadful than Northern had anticipated. A realization that dawned on him after taking numerous steps forward and covering a significant distance. As he moved, his ability to sense essence extended ahead, mapping out the area. After a while, Northern suddenly stopped. A wicked, yet pale grin formed on his face, prompting Ryan to halt and ask, "Is something wrong? You don't look well." Northern closed his hand over his face and looked up, breathing and smiling heartily. "Ryan." "Yes?" answered Ryan, confused, his gaze still a little bit lifeless. "I don't think I have the luxury to be conservative about how I handle this rift. It's incredibly dangerous." Ryan narrowed his eyes suspiciously, not fully understanding what Northern was getting at but replying nonetheless. "Why would you need to be conservative in a rift in the first place? But I guess you're getting to a point." Northern nodded slightly. "I'm very secretive about my abilities." Ryan lifted his chin slightly, sizing up Northern's expression with his cold eyes. "Everyone knows you can summon a monster. You're a summoner who can also fight well with a sword, perhaps due to your heritage ability." Northern raised a brow, not entirely understanding what Ryan was implying. But now wasn't the time for explanations. "Whatever you all think, I guess." Black Mamba, Night Terror. Embers of black flames ignited, giving rise to two enigmata of terror. One was a tall, four-armed figure with four red eyes glowing devilishly. The other, a lithe figure with lean muscles, white lines over its shiny black body, and narrowed eyes gazing intently at its master. As Night Terror arrived, Ryan frowned a little. He had made peace with the fact that a monster was now an ally, but the memory of their battle, the final moments, never failed to send shivers down his spine. Low-key, he wanted a rematch badly, though he wouldn't admit it. The two monsters stood in front of Northern as he commanded them. Go to Jesai and Linus, and work things through from their side. Immediately, both vanished. Ryan narrowed his eyes slightly. "You're sending away your summons. I thought you said you didn't want to be conservative." Northern stabbed Granger into the ground and extended his hand over his head, stretching his muscles. He twirled his dual-bladed staff gently and leaned forward, his upper body tilting ahead. "Be sure to keep up, boy." For a moment, Northern's eyes glowed with an eerie azure light, and then, boom! Northern blasted forward, the entire ground and murky water disintegrating to fragments in his wake. Ryan's hair was blown back by the powerful burst of wind, his eyes widening in shock. In a single motion, Northern seemed to turn into a streak of blue light shooting forward. "What was that?" his mind questioned. He wasn't sure, but he knew he had to catch up. Immediately, Ryan surged forward, running with a serious frown etched on his face. With every step he took, tiny ice stars began to form around him, freezing the ground beneath his feet. As he sprinted, threads of light wove around his body, slowly covering his casual clothes to reveal an armor. Ryan was now clad in brilliantly white armor, resembling something from a forgotten Eastern age, as though it belonged to a heavenly emperor. At the peak of the helmet, two long white feathers extended backward, fluttering gently alongside a silky white cape attached to his back. As he ran forward, Ryan spotted a small rock he could use as a stepping stone. He increased his speed, curving toward the rock like an arrow of light. Once there, he stepped, lifting himself powerfully into the air with his second foot. Ice wings burst from his back, propelling him even farther forward, like a shooting star. As Ryan soared through the air, he finally caught sight of what lay ahead. A moment later, realization made his face darken with horror. What the hell is that? At first, Ryan thought it was just another ground, perhaps a different type of plane from the murky waters. A field of crimson, rotting flesh. But as Northern moved through it, he began to realize. No! Those are monsters? The monsters were so densely packed that they covered the entire expanse, leaving no open space. Even as Northern plowed through them, they immediately filled in behind him. From above, they looked like a colony of red ants relentlessly pursuing a single rodent. Their sheer numbers and movements made Ryan want to vomit. How are we supposed to even kill something like this? He watched Northern plunge through the magnetic mass of morbid abominations. Northern's speed didn't falter. The blue streak of light continued, destroying everything in its path. However, hundreds more surged toward him, quickly closing any openings left by the blue trail. Ryan frowned thoughtfully. What is he even running toward? He traced Northern's trajectory with his gaze. His eyes trembled with despair when he saw it. There was a statue standing over 9 feet tall in the center, surrounded by the rabid rots. He's going for that? Is he crazy? Ryan's face broke apart. Why was Northern targeting such a monstrously powerful creature first? Wouldn't it be better to gain more essence by killing the smaller ones? Or perhaps they should retreat and study the enemy before launching such a reckless attack. Ryan was beginning to sweat as he hovered in the sky, steadied by his wings of ice. Then, in a flash, memories of the Dark Continent flooded his mind. One stood out. An enormous burst of flame from a paragon that he was sure his ice couldn't withstand. Yet somehow Northern emerged unscathed. He exhaled helplessly. What am I even stressing for? He's the strongest drifter. Just as he muttered, a terrible tremor suddenly shook the ground violently, making the sky appear as if it were tumbling for a moment. A foreboding feeling overwhelmed Ryan, like something dangerous was approaching. Something that could extinguish the flames of his soul with a single, effortless blow. Then it happened. With a reverberating sound, like sky being ripped apart by hands of thunder, from the center, where the statue-like monster stood amid the flood of rabid rots, a forest of black lances emerged. Chapter 559, Black Lance. Northern had been considering it ever since he saw Ryan use ice manipulation over a large expanse. But he knew he needed to understand his abilities better before attempting something like that. There was also the matter of giving his essence a form, something he hadn't fully grasped yet. At the same time, Northern was aware he didn't need to completely comprehend that part of his essence. After all, he wasn't like every other drifter, he was something different. He was the embodiment of the void, of nothingness itself. He wouldn't be surprised if his essence didn't have a form. However, one thing he had come to understand from using the power of void, chaos, and formless was that if his essence didn't have a form, it likely had the ability to mimic or adopt any form. Not the form of other drifters' essence, of course, that would probably be more complex to achieve. But drifter's essence gains its form based on everything surrounding them, which ultimately ties back to the nature of their talent. Lightning, ice, wind, fire, water, sand, earth, sound, blood. These elements were diverse and endlessly unconventional. When drifters adapt them to their talent, they undergo a rigorous transformation, forging them into something distinct and original from these base natures. This was why it would be challenging for Northern's essence to mimic such forms. However, when it came to elemental nature in its purest form, that might be possible. Northern pondered all of this as he considered which element would be most compatible for propagating the effect of Black Lance. Black Flame and Black Lance were dual abilities of Chaos Flame. Black Flame embodied the power of burning, while Black Lance embodied the power of cleaving. Both were branches of chaos, designed to bring devastating destruction. Black Flame had been relatively easy to propagate and improve. Black Lance, however, had proven far more challenging. Yet, with every use of Black Lance, Northern had been gaining small insights, and when he saw Ryan use ice manipulation, inspiration struck. He thought long and hard as they walked. If his essence truly was formless, as he suspected, then this innovation might just work. What would best propagate Black Lance? He found only one answer, the void. But since he couldn't use the void recklessly, he chose the element closest to it, darkness. That was when Northern's senses picked up the strange energy at the center of the rift. The realization of what this rift might hold both terrified and excited him. But nothing thrilled him more than the opportunity to finally go all out and harvest as many talents as possible. That was when Northern decided to speak to Ryan, also summoning Night Terror and Black Mamba to head toward his father's location, then plunging forward himself. He ran without stopping, his speed not only relentless but also calculated. Although it was his best speed at that moment, with each step, Northern felt his muscles contract and expand like elastic, his speed increasing as he moved. It was as if his body itself were an infant, constantly learning, adapting, and improving. Finally, he plunged into the flood of monsters, spinning Grenger as he surged forward. He reached the heart of the swarm, where a grotesque statue stood. A monstrous figure resembling a decaying corpse, its sagging skin drooping from a face twisted into a grotesque sneer, trailing down to its feet. An acrid stench of rot hung heavily in the air. But Northern had no time to care as he plummeted toward the monster. He unleashed an overwhelming amount of void essence instantly. This action shrouded the entire area beneath a canopy of death, creating the foreboding atmosphere that Ryan sensed from above. Northern took the massive amount of void essence and submerged it into the shadows, turning the ground beneath the flood of monsters pitch black. The flood of creatures was so dense that even the darkness from below was barely visible. Then Northern channeled the power of cleaving. Black Lance. A dark forest erupted, not of wood and leaves, but of jagged, obsidian lances piercing through the chaotic throng. Each lance appeared to be carved from pure darkness, its edges razor-sharp and its surface glistening with an eerie, oily sheen. In a single, ruthless motion, they thrust upward from the ground, slicing through the dense wave of monsters with unforgiving precision. It was as if the very shadows of the rift had been honed to deadly points, a pure embodiment of merciless intent. Following the brutal assault of the Black Lances, an imperceptible yet devastating slice ran across the landscape. The monsters' bodies couldn't withstand it, cut so rapidly that nothing recognizable remained. Only a splattering flood of gore, merging into a crude, blood-soaked mire. The monster at the center was heavily cleaved, thin black lines crisscrossing its body as chunks of flesh separated, spilling torrents of crimson blood like silken streams. Ryan, floating above, watched with wide eyes as the forest of lances decimated the swarm, a thick flood of blood spreading below. He could barely comprehend what he was witnessing. What kind of power is this? Ryan muttered, horror mingling with awe as he took in the aftermath. Northern emerged from the heart of the carnage, his azure eyes glowing with an eerie calm. The light from the lances reflected in his gaze as they dissipated, dissolving back into shadow and leaving behind silence and a thick, metallic stench in the air. He combed his hand through his blood-soaked hair, wiping away the blood from his face as well. I see. I think I finally understand what Black Lance is. Black Flame is a fire that never stops burning. Black Lance is a lance that delivers a cut that can only be received by what it is cutting. But since I enhanced it with my essence, the result this time was too devastating. Northern finished his thoughts and looked down at the notifications that wouldn't stop appearing before his eyes. You have slain a hazardous Hellion, Rabid Rot. You have gained +4 talent fragments. You have slain a disastrous Hellion, Rabid Rot. You have gained +4 talent fragments. You have slain a calamitous Hellion, Rabid Rot. You have gained +8 talent fragments. Chapter 560 True Speed. The lieutenant's party, after a few minutes of walking forward, also met the same fate. A flood of monsters ran towards them with furious, insane bloodlust, each rapid succession of their march causing the ground to tremble. Lieutenant Dante stopped, staring down at the crowds of monsters with an indifferent gaze. His 3 subordinates, however, immediately plunged to his front, each manifesting their weapons. The robust man manifested a helmet that wove itself around his small round head. 2 metallic wires, almost looking like spines, twisted out of the back of the helmet and pierced both his arms. As the metallic wires pierced, his arms received a massive pump, growing abnormally larger and stronger than the proportion of his body and gaining a silvery metallic sheen. The lady held a blood-red sword extended to her side, ready for battle. and introverted Raphael crossed two blue and golden daggers before him. All three of them patiently waited as the air seemed to drown in a pausing moment. The only sound was the furious march of monsters getting closer. Their eyes gleamed with a polished focus, one that could only have been built through rigorous near-death training and experience. The faint but deadly glow in their eyes reflected that much. When the throng finally reached them, all three plunged forward with astounding speed. There was coordination to their movement. Hansel served as the spearhead of the formation. Despite his ridiculous arms and size, his speed was commendable. He crashed into the crowd of monsters, and many exploded backward, the nearby area disintegrating under the sheer force of his attacks. In quick succession, he smashed his fist into the ground, a massive thunderous clash reverberating through the atmosphere. The ground let out a painful groan as shattered stones flew into the air, smashing nearby monsters. Shane was already in flux, moving in different directions. Her speed surpassed all of them, accompanied by a crude link of sword attacks that curved with red afterimages. Her sword cleaved through the air like a streak of crimson lightning, leaving arcs that burned red-hot in the wake of each strike. Shane's movements were like a ghost's. There one moment, gone the next, always just out of reach but never out of sight, as if taunting the monsters with glimpses of her next attack. She weaved between them, her blade's edge biting deep into twisted flesh, each slash a precise, brutal execution. Raphael stayed at the edge of the fray, his daggers twirling in his hands like extensions of his own will. His eyes were cold, calculating, his movements controlled yet fluid. Every swipe of his twin blades brought down a creature, a dance of gold and blue that struck with almost surgical precision. He aimed for weak points, veins, and ligaments, immobilizing one after another. As a creature lunged at him, he sidestepped and drove a dagger upward, slipping between plated scales and rending it apart with a single, sharp twist. Amid the chaos, Lieutenant Dante watched with detached satisfaction, the storm of carnage unfolding before him like a conductor appraising his orchestra. His subordinates were pushing forward, holding the line, and the throng of monsters was beginning to falter, their numbers thinning, bodies littering the ground. Yet his gaze remained fixed, unflinching, as if he awaited a greater threat, something lurking beyond the current wave. Alistran, having recovered himself, stood a little way behind. He had wanted to follow immediately, but when he saw the level at which all three fought, he unconsciously stopped. Now it was too late and awkward to move. It was like being trapped in a position where you should have acted when others were acting, and now that they had gone deep into the battle, joining would call for unnecessary attention. Hence, he had to stand there and wait awkwardly, even though it wasn't what he wanted. However, this gave him time to really gauge Lieutenant Dante's subordinates. All three of them alone driving the massive line of monsters back was insane. Their synergy was amazing, each one filling in for the other's weaknesses in quick succession of their movements. Hansel's large attacks threw off monsters in general, making it easier for the other two to successfully land their strikes. He was between the two of them, serving as a link and balance of sorts. Alistran hadn't realized it before, but aside from being the strongest of the trio, Hansel was probably the leader here, of course when one factored out Lieutenant Dante himself. Everything was going well, the onslaught interesting to watch, until a sudden sense of foreboding darkness enveloped the air. Dante felt it as instantly as everyone else did. All three fighting from behind had swiftly taken a large leap backward, sweat buckling down their faces. Their minds raced with questions. What was that? Lieutenant Dante furrowed his brows slightly and raised his eyes to the sky. In that moment, a loud, strange, thunderous sound reverberated through the entire air. It caused the lieutenant to immediately fling his eyes wide open. He grabbed the hilt of his sword, tilted it slightly with the weight of his hands, and shot away like a fired arrow. In one swift line of speed, he pierced through the formation of monsters. All of them blasted into the air as he swept through them in a jiffy. Alistran's eyes grew wide as he witnessed an instantaneous throw-up of the monsters. Gravity suddenly reversed on every single one of them. The cause of such gravity reversion was the immense speed of the lieutenant. Everything slowed before the lieutenant's eyes as he pulled out his sword, seemingly slowly. But what all onlookers could see was a sweeping race of thin light, diagonally going helter-skelter, in a few beats. Then it dropped. At once, all the monsters' bodies dropped, splurging out crimson gore that rained down. The lieutenant then sheathed his sword and looked forward. His form vanished into thin air. He appeared later, hovering in the air and looking down on a dense crowd of crimson abominations, with a statue-like monster standing in their midst. It was just as his subordinates had reported. The monsters were all Hellion rank and none were moving to attack, just surrounding the statue-like monster, which was a Maelstrom rank monster. His eyes narrowed a bit, his thoughts active. If this place is still intact, then where did that massacre just now happen?